Imagine a giant spaceship traveling through deep space, far from any planet or star. The engines need fuel, but there are no gas stations in space. So scientists had an incredible idea. What if we could use comets as natural refueling stations? These ancient chunks of ice wandering through the cosmos since the beginning of everything could be the key to future space travel. Get ready to fall asleep while we explore how engineers are planning to turn space ice blocks into fuel for spaceships, using technology that seems straight out of science fiction movies but is real science. How exactly would a ship manage to land on something traveling thousands of kilometers per hour through the void of space? Subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment what part of the world you're watching from. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. Imagine a future where spaceships don't need to carry all their fuel from Earth but can instead gas up at cosmic pit stops. This isn't science fiction. It's a genuine possibility that space agencies and private companies are already investigating. The cosmic gas stations of tomorrow might very well be comets, those icy wanderers of our solar system that have fascinated humanity for millennia. Comets represent some of the most resource-rich objects in our solar system, particularly when we consider their potential as refueling stations for deep space missions. These celestial bodies are often described as dirty snowballs because they're primarily composed of ice, dust, and various organic compounds, all materials that could potentially be processed into spacecraft fuel. When we look at their composition in detail, we find that comets typically contain water ice as their dominant component, making up 50 to 80% of their volatile materials. This water ice is accompanied by other frozen gases, including carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, methane, and ammonia. Scientists have also detected more complex organic compounds like formaldehyde and hydrogen cyanide in comet nuclei. The exact ratios of these materials vary from comet to comet, which means that any extraction technology would need to be adaptable to different compositions depending on which comet a spacecraft visits. The dust component of comets consists primarily of silicate minerals and carbon-rich compounds similar to what we might find in carbonaceous asteroids. While these materials aren't immediately useful as fuel, they could potentially provide raw materials for spacecraft repairs or even construction of additional infrastructure around a comet-based refueling station. One of the most exciting aspects of comet composition is the abundance of hydrogen and oxygen, the two components of water that, when separated through electrolysis, create one of the most efficient chemical rocket propellants known. A typical comet nucleus might contain enough water ice to produce hundreds of thousands of tons of this propellant, theoretically enough to fuel multiple spacecraft missions. Carbon compounds found in comets could also be processed into methane or other hydrocarbon fuels. While these don't provide the same specific impulse, a measure of propellant efficiency, as hydrogen and oxygen, they're easier to store and might be useful for certain types of propulsion systems or for generating power through fuel cells. The varying compositions of comets actually present both challenges and opportunities. A comet with higher proportions of water ice might be ideal for producing hydrogen-oxygen propellants, while one with more methane could be better suited for producing different types of fuel. Space agencies would likely survey comets in advance to determine which ones have the most favourable composition for their particular needs. Scientists estimate that up to 80% of a comet's mass could potentially be converted into usable materials for spacecraft operations. This incredible resource efficiency is what makes comets so attractive as potential refueling stations. Unlike planets or moons with substantial gravity wells, comets require relatively little energy to approach or depart from, making them efficient places to stop for fuel. The organic compounds found in comets are particularly interesting from both a scientific and practical perspective. These carbon-based molecules are similar to the precursors of life on Earth, and studying them helps us understand how organic chemistry evolved in our solar system. From a practical standpoint, These compounds could potentially be synthesized into more complex fuels or even materials needed for life support systems in deep space habitats. Understanding the exact composition of a target comet would be essential before sending a refueling mission. Ground-based spectroscopic observations provide initial data, but close-up reconnaissance by probes would likely be necessary to determine the precise makeup of any comet selected for resource extraction. Missions like the European Space Agency's Rosetta, which studied Comet 67P/Churyumov-Gerasimenko up close, have provided valuable insights into comet composition that would inform future refueling operations. The physical structure of comets also affects their viability as refueling stations. Many comets have a porous, low-density structure, often compared to freshly fallen snow in terms of consistency. This porosity could make extraction easier in some ways, as the material might be less difficult to break apart than solid ice. However, it also means that the surface could be unstable, presenting landing and anchoring challenges for any spacecraft attempting to extract resources. As comets approach the Sun, they become more active, with ice sublimating directly from solid to gas and creating the characteristic coma and tail. This activity could provide both opportunities and challenges for fuel harvesting. On one hand, the natural outgassing might make some volatile compounds easier to collect without expending energy to extract them. On the other hand, these same processes could create hazardous conditions for spacecraft operating near the comet. The dust ejected during active phases contains many of the organic compounds that would be valuable for fuel production. Specialized collection systems could potentially gather this material directly from the comet's coma, avoiding the need to land on the surface altogether. This approach might be particularly useful for smaller spacecraft that lack the equipment necessary for surface operations. Temperature variations across a comet's surface and interior add another layer of complexity to resource extraction planning. The sunlit side of a comet can reach temperatures warm enough for ice to sublimate, while the dark side remains extremely cold. These temperature gradients might be exploited to assist in material processing, using natural heating and cooling cycles to aid in separation and refinement processes. Radiation from the sun also affects comet chemistry, breaking down some compounds and creating others through photochemical reactions. These processes have been occurring naturally throughout the lifetime of the comet, creating a complex mixture of primary and secondary compounds that extraction systems would need to separate and process. The dust-to-ice ratio of comets varies considerably, with some having thick dust mantles covering their icy interiors. Extraction systems would need to penetrate these layers to reach the volatile, rich material beneath. Alternatively, operations might target regions where recent activity has exposed fresh ice, such as areas around active vents or newly formed surface features. In considering comets as fuel sources, we must also acknowledge their scientific value. These objects are time capsules from the early solar system, containing materials that have remained largely unchanged for billions of years. Any resource utilization would ideally be conducted in ways that preserve scientific access to undisturbed areas of the comet, allowing us to continue learning about solar system formation even as we extract practical resources. Water extraction and processing for hydrogen-oxygen propellants. The concept of turning comet ice into rocket fuel represents one of the most promising approaches to sustainable deep space exploration. Water is often overlooked in daily life on Earth, but in the vacuum of space, it becomes liquid gold, or more accurately, period. Liquid hydrogen and oxygen, the components of one of the most powerful chemical rocket propellants known. Water ice is abundant on comets, sometimes comprising up to 80% of their volatile content. This makes them perfect natural reservoirs for spacecraft propellant production. The basic principle sounds simple. Extract the water ice, split it into hydrogen and oxygen through electrolysis, and use these gases as rocket fuel. However, The practical implementation of this process in the harsh environment of space presents numerous engineering challenges that must be overcome. The first step in water processing is extraction from the comet itself. Unlike Earth mining operations, comet mining would occur in microgravity conditions with temperatures ranging from -150 to +50 degrees Celsius depending on the comet's distance from the Sun and local surface conditions. Several methods have been proposed for this extraction process, each with its own advantages and technical hurdles. Surface mining represents the most straightforward approach, where robotic systems would physically collect ice from the comet's surface. This method would likely employ specialized scoops, drills, or scrapers designed to work in the comet's low-gravity environment. The collected material would then be transported to processing units on or near the comet. This approach works best for comets with exposed surface ice, but becomes more challenging if the valuable volatiles are buried beneath layers of dust and less useful materials. Subsurface drilling offers another option, potentially accessing richer deposits of ice that remain protected from solar radiation. Drilling in a low gravity, potentially unstable medium presents unique challenges. The force of drilling could potentially push the extraction vehicle away from the surface unless it's securely anchored. Additionally, the drilling equipment would need to function reliably in extreme cold and vacuum conditions, with limited opportunities for maintenance or repair. A third approach takes advantage of the comet's natural behavior. As comets approach the Sun, ice sublimates directly from solid to gas. Collection systems could capture these naturally released volatiles without needing to physically disturb the comet's structure. This method is particularly appealing for smaller operations that might lack heavy equipment, though it only works efficiently when the comet is relatively active. Once the water ice is collected, it must be processed to remove dust, organic contaminants, and other non-water volatiles. In the vacuum of space, heating the ice causes direct sublimation from solid to gas, bypassing the liquid phase. Specialized condensation systems would then capture this water vapor, possibly using cold traps, surfaces deliberately kept at low temperatures to cause the vapor to refreeze or condense. The purified water would then move to electrolysis units, which use electrical current to split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen gas. The reaction is straightforward. Two H2O molecules yield 2 H2 and 1 O2. This process requires significant electrical power, which might come from solar panels, radioisotope generators, or potentially small nuclear reactors for larger scale operations. Power requirements represent one of the most significant challenges for water processing on comets. Solar power becomes less effective as distance from the Sun increases, making operations in the outer solar system particularly challenging. The electrolysis process itself is energy intensive, requiring approximately 4.5 kilowatt-hours of electricity to produce 1 kilogram of hydrogen and 8 kilograms of oxygen, the ratio in which these elements exist in water. After electrolysis, the gases must be compressed and liquefied for storage as rocket propellant. This step presents perhaps the greatest technical challenge in the entire process. Hydrogen must be cooled to -253 degrees Celsius to liquefy, making it one of the most difficult substances to store. Oxygen liquefies at the comparatively warm -183 degrees Celsius, but still requires significant cooling capability. The natural cold of deep space offers some advantages for cooling, but maintaining these cryogenic temperatures requires sophisticated insulation systems and active cooling technology. Boil-off, the gradual loss of liquid gases as they warm and return to gaseous state, represents a significant efficiency concern for long-term storage. Advanced storage systems might incorporate multi-layer insulation, sun shields, and active refrigeration to minimize these losses. Another consideration is the ratio of hydrogen to oxygen produced. While electrolysis naturally produces hydrogen and oxygen in the perfect 2-to-1 ratio by volume, or 1-to-8 by mass for combustion, some propulsion systems might require different ratios. Additional processing could separate excess oxygen for use in life support systems or other applications if human crews are present. The equipment needed for water extraction and processing must be highly automated and robust. Communication delays between Earth and deep space mean that systems must operate autonomously for extended periods, making decisions about extraction targets, processing parameters, and responding to equipment malfunctions without immediate human input. Artificial intelligence and sophisticated sensor arrays would be essential components of any successful operation. Radiation presents another challenge for water processing equipment. Without Earth's protective magnetic field and atmosphere, solar radiation and cosmic rays can damage electronic components and degrade materials over time. Shielding critical systems adds weight to the mission but is necessary for long-term operations in the space environment. The physical configuration of a water processing facility would likely depend on the scale of operations. Small-scale demonstrations might integrate all components into a single spacecraft that lands on the comet's surface. Larger industrial-scale operations might distribute functions across multiple specialized units, some for extraction, others for processing and storage, working in coordination around the comet. For human-crewed missions, the water processing infrastructure offers benefits beyond just propellant production. Extracted water could supply drinking water and oxygen for life support, while excess oxygen could replenish atmosphere in habitats. This multi-purpose utility makes water processing technology particularly valuable for long-duration missions where resupply from Earth is impractical. Testing these technologies presents its own set of challenges. While some components can be tested on Earth or the International Space Station, the full system can only be validated in the actual environment of a comet. This suggests that early comet refueling missions would likely be small-scale technology demonstrations before graduating to operations capable of supporting major exploration initiatives. The development of efficient water extraction and processing technology could fundamentally change our approach to space exploration. Rather than carrying all necessary propellant from Earth, a requirement that dramatically limits mission range and duration, spacecraft could travel relatively light, refueling at comets to extend their reach throughout the solar system. This capability would transform comets from distant scientific curiosities into critical infrastructure for humanity's expansion into space. The development of water extraction and processing systems is just one part of the incredible challenge of refueling at a comet. Before any spacecraft can begin harvesting these valuable resources, it must first accomplish something that's remarkably difficult, navigating to and rendezvousing with one of the most elusive objects in our solar system. Unlike planets and moons that follow relatively predictable circular orbits, comets trace elongated elliptical paths that often take them from the furthest reaches of the solar system to relatively close approaches to the Sun. This orbital eccentricity makes them moving targets that require sophisticated navigation systems to intercept. A mission planner can't simply plot a direct course to where a comet is now. They must calculate where it will be months or even years in the future when the spacecraft arrives. The challenge begins with obtaining accurate orbital parameters for the target comet. While astronomers have catalogued the orbits of hundreds of comets, these calculations have inherent uncertainties. A comet's trajectory can be altered slightly by outgassing as it approaches the Sun. Essentially, the comet acts like a very weak rocket as material sublimates from its surface, creating small but unpredictable changes in its path. For long-period comets that spend centuries in the outer solar system, our observational data may be limited to just a single pass through the inner solar system, making their return trajectories somewhat uncertain. Even with perfect knowledge of a comet's current position and velocity, planning an interception requires solving what mathematicians call a Lambert problem, determining the trajectory that will take a spacecraft from Earth to intercept the comet while minimizing propellant use. This calculation must account for the gravitational influences of the Sun, planets, and other significant bodies in the solar system. The mathematics involved are so complex that mission planners rely on sophisticated computer modeling to find optimal transfer orbits. As the spacecraft approaches its target, it needs increasingly precise information about the comet's position. Ground-based observations typically have error margins measured in hundreds or thousands of kilometers, far too imprecise for a successful rendezvous. The spacecraft must use its own sensors, including optical cameras and potentially radar, to refine its understanding of the comet's exact location and adjust its approach accordingly. The approach phase becomes particularly challenging when dealing with active comets. As a comet nears the Sun, it begins to release gas and dust, forming the characteristic coma and tail. These outgassing events can be unpredictable and potentially hazardous to a spacecraft attempting to navigate close to the nucleus. The dust particles, though microscopic, can damage spacecraft components when encountered at relative velocities of several kilometers per second. Navigation systems must include capabilities to detect and avoid these hazards, potentially altering course on short notice without human intervention due to the communication delays involved in deep space missions. Another complication arises from the irregular shape of comet nuclei. Unlike planets, which are roughly spherical, comets often have bizarre, elongated shapes with rough, uneven surfaces. Comet 67P/Churyumov-Gerasimenko, studied up close by the Rosetta mission, resembled a rubber duck with two distinct lobes connected by a narrow neck. This irregularity means that the comet's center of mass isn't at its geometric center, complicating orbital calculations for spacecraft attempting to establish stable orbits around it. The low mass of comets creates additional navigational challenges. A typical comet nucleus might have a mass billions of times smaller than Earth, resulting in a very weak gravitational field. This weak gravity means that orbits around the comet are easily disturbed by outside forces like solar radiation pressure or the gravitational pull of planets. Maintaining a stable orbit around a comet requires frequent thruster adjustments, consuming precious propellant. For missions intended to land on the comet, the final approach phase requires extreme precision. The spacecraft must match velocity with the rotating comet and descend to the selected landing site without the benefit of significant gravitational attraction to help pull it down. This is more akin to docking with another spacecraft than landing on a planet, requiring precise thrusters and automated systems that can make split-second adjustments. Communication delays present yet another obstacle to comet rendezvous. Depending on where in the solar system the encounter occurs, radio signals between Earth and the spacecraft might take anywhere from minutes to hours to make the round trip. This means that critical navigation decisions during final approach must be made autonomously by the spacecraft's onboard computers. Artificial intelligence and machine learning systems become essential for processing sensor data and making real-time adjustments to the flight path. The rotation of the comet adds complexity to the rendezvous. Comets typically rotate once every few hours to days, meaning that any particular surface feature moves at speeds of several meters per second. A spacecraft attempting to land must time its approach to coincide with the rotation of its intended landing site, similar to how aircraft carriers time aircraft landings with the movement of the ship. Fuel constraints add pressure to the entire navigation process. Unlike aircraft that can circle an airport while waiting for clearance to land, a deep space probe has extremely limited propellant reserves. Mission planners must carefully balance the need for course corrections against the requirement to preserve fuel for the actual scientific or resource extraction operations once the rendezvous is achieved. But, in many cases, this leads to the use of gravity assist maneuvers that use planetary flybys to alter the spacecraft's trajectory without consuming propellant, though these add complexity and often years to mission duration. The navigation system must also be prepared for contingencies. If the primary landing site proves unsuitable upon close inspection, the spacecraft needs sufficient propellant reserves and computational capability to identify and divert to an alternate site. This requires sophisticated hazard detection algorithms that can quickly analyze surface features and determine landing safety in real time. Power management becomes intertwined with navigation challenges as well. Many deep space missions rely on solar power, which becomes less available at greater distances from the Sun. Navigation systems must be designed to function with limited power, particularly for missions targeting comets in the outer solar system. This might necessitate periodic hibernation modes where non-essential systems are powered down to conserve energy, further complicating the navigation timeline. Despite these formidable challenges, several missions have successfully rendezvoused with comets, demonstrating that the navigational hurdles can be overcome with proper planning and technology. The European Space Agency's Rosetta mission spent 10 years en route to Comet 67P/Churyumov-Gerasimenko, using 4 planetary gravity assists to shape its trajectory before ultimately entering orbit around the comet in August 2014. This mission not only proved the feasibility of comet rendezvous but also accomplished the first ever soft landing on a comet nucleus with its Philae lander. Once a spacecraft successfully navigates to a comet, the next major challenge becomes securing itself to the surface for resource extraction operations. This is where specialized landing and anchoring systems become critical to mission success. Landing on a comet presents a unique set of challenges unlike touching down on any other celestial body in our solar system. The incredibly low gravity, typically less than 1/10,000th of Earth's, means that traditional landing approaches don't work. On the Moon or Mars, a spacecraft can use rocket engines to descend and then rely on the planet's gravity to hold it in place. On a comet, the gravitational attraction is so weak that even minor forces like the recoil from a drill starting up could potentially launch the spacecraft back into space. The first consideration in designing a comet landing system is the touchdown speed. The approach must be extremely gentle, measured in centimeters per second rather than meters per second used for planetary landings. Too fast an approach could cause the spacecraft to bounce off the surface and back into space. The Philae lander from the Rosetta mission experienced exactly this problem when its Harpoon anchoring system failed to deploy, causing it to bounce several times before finally coming to rest in a shadowed area of the comet. The landing gear itself must be adaptable to a wide range of surface conditions. Comet surfaces vary tremendously, potentially containing regions of hard ice, brittle, crusty material, or powdery regolith-like dust. The legs need sufficient shock absorption capabilities to prevent bouncing while also distributing the spacecraft's mass to avoid sinking too deeply into softer material. Broad, snowshoe-like footpads might be used to reduce pressure on potentially fragile surfaces. Immediately upon touchdown, the anchoring system needs to activate to secure the spacecraft. Various anchoring mechanisms have been proposed and tested, each with advantages for different surface types. Drills can bore into icy surfaces, providing a strong mechanical connection, but they consume significant power and may struggle with extremely hard or extremely soft materials. The drills would likely be hollow, allowing for the extraction of core samples for scientific analysis or resource processing while simultaneously creating an anchor point. Harpoons represent another anchoring approach, firing pointed projectiles connected to cables into the comet's surface. This system can deploy quickly but depends on finding the right balance between penetration force and recoil management. Too strong a firing mechanism creates recoil that could push the spacecraft away, while too weak a mechanism might fail to penetrate adequately. Multiple harpoons fired simultaneously from different points on the spacecraft could help distribute forces and increase reliability. Adhesive systems offer a third alternative, using specially designed materials that can bond to icy or dusty surfaces in vacuum conditions. These might include electrostatic adhesion that uses charge plates to attract oppositely charged particles in the comet material, or phase change materials that can flow into surface irregularities and then solidify to create mechanical interlocking. The advantage of adhesive systems is their low power requirements and lack of recoil, though they may struggle with dust-covered surfaces that prevent direct contact with the underlying ice. For longer-term operations, a combination of these technologies might provide the most reliable anchoring solution. Initial contact could be secured with harpoons or adhesives, followed by the deployment of deeper drills for permanent anchoring once the spacecraft's position has stabilized. Redundancy is essential given the mission-critical nature of the anchoring system. If the spacecraft drifts away from the comet, the entire resource extraction operation becomes impossible. The anchoring system must also accommodate the spacecraft's planned activities. Resource extraction operations typically involve drilling, heating, or otherwise disturbing the comet's surface, creating forces that the anchors must counteract. The system needs to maintain stability while excavation or processing equipment operates, potentially for months or years depending on mission duration. Temperature management presents another significant challenge for landing systems. Comets experience extreme temperature variations as they approach and recede from the Sun. When far from the Sun, surface temperatures may drop below -200 degrees Celsius, potentially causing mechanical components to become brittle or lubricants to freeze. Conversely, sunlit regions of a comet near perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun, can reach temperatures above 0 degrees Celsius, potentially causing ices to sublimate directly beneath the landing gear. The landing system must function across this entire temperature range and adapt to changing conditions throughout the comet's orbit. The rotation of the comet creates additional stresses on the anchoring system. As the comet spins, centrifugal forces pull outward on the spacecraft, potentially weakening its connection to the surface. While these forces are relatively small due to the slow rotation of most comets, typically one rotation every few hours to days, they act constantly and must be accounted for in anchor design, particularly for missions intended to remain on the comet's surface through multiple rotational cycles. Outgassing events present perhaps the most unpredictable hazard to landed operations. As a comet approaches the Sun, trapped volatiles sublimate and can erupt through the surface in jets. If such an eruption occurs near or beneath the landing site, it could potentially damage equipment or dislodge even well-anchored spacecraft. Monitoring systems would need to detect early signs of such activity and either reinforce anchoring or, in extreme cases, temporarily detach from the surface until the outgassing subsides. The design of comet landing systems also has to consider contingency planning. If the primary landing site proves unsuitable upon close inspection, the spacecraft must retain sufficient propellant to abort the landing attempt and try elsewhere. Similarly, if surface conditions change during the mission, perhaps due to increased solar heating as the comet approaches the Sun, the spacecraft might need to relocate to a more stable region. This requires landing gear that can detach cleanly from its anchors and re-establish itself at a new location. The mass constraints of interplanetary missions make all these engineering challenges even more difficult. Every kilogram of landing gear means one less kilogram available for scientific instruments or resource processing equipment. Engineers must find clever ways to make components serve multiple purposes, perhaps using the same drills for both anchoring and resource extraction, or designing landing legs that can double as solar panel supports or thermal radiators. Despite these formidable challenges, the development of reliable comet landing and anchoring systems represents an essential step toward utilizing comet resources for space exploration. As our understanding of comet surface properties improves through missions like Rosetta and its successors, engineers gain valuable data to refine these systems, bringing us closer to the day when comets serve not just as subjects of scientific study, but as cosmic refueling stations, enabling humanity's expansion throughout the solar system. Once a spacecraft has successfully landed and anchored to a comet's surface, the real work begins, extracting and processing the valuable resources locked within the icy nucleus. This is where in situ resource utilization (ISRU) technologies become essential to mission success. The term in situ simply means in place, period, referring to the process of using materials found at the destination rather than bringing everything from Earth. ISRU represents a fundamental shift in how we approach space exploration. Traditionally, missions carried all necessary supplies from Earth, a severely limiting factor given the enormous cost of launching mass into space. It currently costs thousands of dollars to put just 1 kilogram into orbit, and much more to send it to deep space destinations. By developing technologies that can harvest and process resources already present at exploration sites, we dramatically expand what's possible with a given launch mass. On comets, IceRU focuses primarily on extracting the volatile ices that make up the bulk of these bodies. A typical comet contains water ice, carbon dioxide, methane, ammonia, and various organic compounds, all potentially valuable both as propellant and life support resources. The challenge lies in developing compact, reliable systems that can extract these materials in the harsh environment of space with minimal human intervention. The first component of a Comet ISRU system would be the extraction hardware, the equipment that actually removes material from the comet. Several approaches have been proposed, each with advantages for different mission profiles. Mechanical drilling represents the most straightforward method, using rotary or percussive drills to break up the icy material and bring it to the surface for processing. These systems build on technologies developed for Mars and lunar missions but must be adapted to the unique properties of comet ice, which can vary from fluffy, snow-like consistency to hard, brittle ice depending on depth and composition. Thermal mining offers an alternative that might be more energy efficient in certain scenarios. Rather than physically breaking up the ice, heating elements would be inserted into the comet material, causing volatiles to sublimate. The resulting vapor would then be captured by collection systems positioned above the heated area. This approach eliminates many moving parts, but requires careful thermal management to prevent the vapor from refreezing before it can be collected. For missions targeting particularly active comets, passive collection systems might capture material that's already being naturally released through outgassing. These would essentially be sophisticated nets designed to gather dust and ice particles ejected from the comet's surface as it warms under solar radiation. While this approach requires less equipment and energy than active mining, it depends on the comet's natural activity cycles and may not provide reliable resource flow. Once material is extracted from the comet, it must be processed to separate useful components from waste. This begins with a beneficiation step, essentially sorting the raw material to concentrate the most valuable components. In practice, this might involve heating the extracted ice in a controlled chamber, allowing different compounds to sublimate at different temperatures based on their volatility. Say, water ice, for example, sublimates at a higher temperature than carbon dioxide, allowing for sequential separation of components. Microwave heating systems show particular promise for comet material processing. Unlike conventional heating, which works from the outside in, microwaves can penetrate several centimeters into icy material, heating it volumetrically. This is both more energy efficient and allows for more precise control of the sublimation process. Experimental systems tested on Earth have demonstrated that microwave heating can effectively release volatiles from ice dust mixtures similar to comet material. The processing system would include vapor handling components designed to capture, compress, dot, and store the released gases. Different gases would be routed to appropriate storage vessels or to secondary processing units. Water vapor, for instance, might be condensed back to liquid or ice for storage, or sent directly to electrolysis units to produce hydrogen and oxygen for propellant. Carbon compounds could be processed into methane or other fuels, or potentially used as feedstock for 3D printers to manufacture replacement parts or new equipment. Filtration systems would be necessary throughout the processing chain to remove dust particles and unwanted contaminants. These might include mechanical filters, electrostatic precipitators, or centrifugal separators adapted to function in microgravity. The dust separated from volatile ices isn't merely waste. It contains valuable minerals and complex organic compounds that could serve as radiation shielding or raw material for construction. The entire ISRU system would need to operate with minimal human intervention, particularly for early demonstration missions where crew would not be present. This necessitates sophisticated automation and artificial intelligence capabilities. Sensors throughout the system would monitor pressures, temperatures, flow rates, and composition. with control algorithms making real-time adjustments to maintain optimal performance. The system would need to identify and respond to unexpected conditions, such as unusual ice compositions or equipment malfunctions, without direct human input due to the communication delays involved in deep space operations. Power generation represents another critical aspect of ISRU system design. Processing icy material requires significant energy, particularly for heating and electrolysis operations. Solar panels might provide sufficient power for operations in the inner solar system, though their effectiveness decreases dramatically at greater distances from the Sun, for missions to comets with orbits that take them to the outer solar system. Radioisotope power systems or small nuclear reactors might be necessary to ensure consistent energy availability regardless of solar distance. Modularity would likely be a defining characteristic of successful ISRU systems, rather than a monolithic processing plant. Early implementations would probably consist of interconnected modules, each handling a specific function. This approach offers several advantages. Modules could be individually tested and qualified on Earth before integration. Failed components could be isolated without shutting down the entire system. And future missions could upgrade specific capabilities without replacing the entire infrastructure. The technologies developed for Comet resource utilization have applications beyond just refueling operations. Similar systems could extract water from the lunar poles or Martian subsurface ice, process regolith on asteroids or moons for construction materials, or even extract carbon dioxide from Venus's atmosphere for manufacturing. Each environment presents unique challenges, but the fundamental principles of extracting and processing local materials remain consistent. Early demonstrations of Comet ISRU would likely start small, perhaps processing just a few kilograms of material daily to prove the concept before scaling up to production levels that could support major exploration initiatives. These Pathfinder missions would validate technologies while providing valuable data about the composition and structure of comet material that would inform future, larger-scale operations. The ultimate vision for Comet ISRU involves networks of semi-autonomous processing stations established on multiple comets throughout the solar system. These would serve as refueling depots for deep space missions, dramatically extending our reach into the cosmos by breaking the limitation of having to carry all propellant from Earth. A spacecraft could launch with just enough fuel to reach the first comet station, refuel there, and continue onward in a series of hops that could eventually span the entire solar system. While extracting resources from comets presents numerous engineering challenges, one of the most significant is thermal management, controlling heat in an environment that experiences extreme temperature swings. Effective thermal control is essential not just for the comfort of potential human operators, but for the functionality of every system involved in the mining operation. The thermal environment on a comet is among the most challenging in the solar system. When far from the Sun, surface temperatures can plunge below -200 degrees Celsius, cold enough to freeze most conventional lubricants and make materials brittle. As the comet approaches the Sun, sunlit areas may warm to temperatures above freezing, while shadowed regions remain extremely cold, creating thermal gradients of hundreds of degrees over just a few meters of distance. This variable thermal environment creates challenges throughout the resource extraction process. Equipment must function across this entire temperature range, with components expanding and contracting as temperatures change. Materials must be selected that can withstand repeated thermal cycling without fatigue failure. And joints must accommodate different expansion rates between connected components. The extraction process itself involves significant thermal considerations. When drilling into extremely cold ice, the mechanical energy of drilling converts to heat, potentially melting or sublimating the very material being collected. This can cause drill bits to freeze in place if the melted material refreezes before it can be cleared. Conversely, if too much heat is generated, volatile compounds might be lost through uncontrolled sublimation before they can be properly captured and processed. Thermal mining approaches face even more complex heat management challenges. These systems intentionally apply heat to sublimate ices, but must do so in a controlled manner that allows for efficient capture of the released volatiles. Too little heat fails to release compounds of interest, while too much wastes energy and may cause unwanted chemical reactions in the heated material. The heating elements themselves must operate reliably despite being inserted into icy material that transitions from solid to gas during the extraction process. Once volatiles are extracted and begin processing, preventing unintended phase changes becomes critical. Pipelines carrying volatile gases can easily become clogged if the gas recondenses or refreezes during transport. This requires careful insulation and potentially active heating along transport pathways. The problem is particularly acute for water vapor, which can freeze at relatively high temperatures compared to other volatiles found in comets. Storage vessels present another thermal management challenge. Tanks holding cryogenic liquids like liquid hydrogen must be kept extremely cold to prevent boil-off losses, requiring sophisticated insulation systems. Multi-layer insulation, MLI, consisting of multiple layers of reflective material separated by vacuum gaps, can reduce heat transfer by radiation, while vacuum-jacketed tanks minimize conduction and convection losses. For long-duration storage, active cooling systems might be necessary to counteract the inevitable heat leakage through even the best passive insulation. The spacecraft's power systems introduce their own thermal complications. Solar panels work by absorbing sunlight, but only about 20% of that energy converts to electricity. The rest becomes heat that must be dissipated. Nuclear power sources like radioisotope thermoelectric generators, RTGs, or fission reactors generate substantial waste heat by design. This heat must be managed to prevent overheating of nearby components while potentially being utilized for beneficial purposes like keeping volatile processing lines above freezing temperatures. Electronics present a particular thermal control challenge. Computer systems and control electronics typically have narrow operating temperature ranges, generally between -40 and +85 degrees Celsius for standard space-rated components. These systems generate heat during operation that must be removed to prevent overheating, yet they must also be kept warm enough to function during dormant periods or in shadowed locations. This often requires a combination of heaters, radiators, and heat pipes to maintain appropriate temperatures across all mission phases. The vacuum environment of space complicates thermal management by eliminating convection, one of the primary heat transfer mechanisms on Earth. Without air to carry heat away from hot components, spacecraft must rely entirely on conduction, direct contact heat transfer, and radiation, electromagnetic heat transfer to move heat from where it's generated to where it can be safely dissipated. Heat pipes, sealed tubes containing a working fluid that evaporates at the hot end and condenses at the cold end, offer an efficient way to transport heat across the spacecraft, essentially creating artificial conduction paths between components that aren't in direct contact. Radiators serve as the ultimate heat rejection system for spacecraft, releasing excess thermal energy into the coldness of space. These typically consist of flat panels with high emissivity surfaces connected to the spacecraft's thermal control system. The sizing and positioning of radiators involves careful balancing. They must be large enough to reject waste heat during peak operations, but positioned to avoid absorbing too much solar radiation or heat reflected from the comet's surface. The day-night cycle created by the comet's rotation adds another layer of complexity to thermal control. Equipment exposed to direct sunlight may require cooling, while the same equipment may need heating just hours later when rotated into shadow. This cycling can cause thermal fatigue in materials and requires sophisticated control systems that anticipate temperature changes rather than merely reacting to them. Active thermal control systems use heaters, coolers, and pumped fluid loops to maintain appropriate temperatures throughout the spacecraft. These systems consume precious power resources but provide precise control that passive systems cannot match. For critical components like propellant lines or scientific instruments with narrow operating temperature ranges, active control may be the only viable option despite its complexity and power requirements. The dust ejected during extraction operations can settle on thermal control surfaces, changing their radiative properties. A radiator designed with a specific emissivity will function differently when coated with comet dust, potentially leading to overheating of connected systems. Similarly, solar panels become less efficient when dust-covered, generating less power while still absorbing the same amount of heat, a double problem for the spacecraft's energy budget. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of thermal management for comet mining operations is the need to handle the extreme cold of the volatile products themselves. Liquid hydrogen at negative 253 degrees Celsius and liquid oxygen at negative 183 degrees Celsius must be stored and managed, often in close proximity to electronics that function best near room temperature. The thermal isolation required between these systems drives much of the overall spacecraft design, with structural elements often serving double duty as thermal barriers. Successful thermal management for comet mining operations requires a systems engineering approach that considers heat flows throughout the entire mission profile. Every component becomes part of the thermal network, both generating and absorbing heat while influencing the thermal environment of neighbouring systems. Computer modelling plays an essential role in designing these systems, allowing engineers to simulate the complex interactions between components under the variable conditions a comet mining spacecraft will experience. The complex thermal management systems necessary for comet mining operations directly influence the design of propulsion systems that will use the extracted resources. After all, the primary goal of harvesting comet materials is to produce fuel that can power spacecraft engines, extending mission capabilities beyond what would be possible if all propellant had to be carried from Earth. The unique properties of comet-derived materials open up several propulsion possibilities, each with its own advantages and technical challenges. Chemical rocket engines represent the most mature technology for utilizing comet-derived fuels. The hydrogen and oxygen produced through water electrolysis can power high-thrust engines similar to those used in current space programs. When combusted together, these elements create an extremely energetic reaction, producing superheated steam that's expelled through a nozzle to generate thrust. This propellant combination offers excellent performance, with a specific impulse, a measure of propellant efficiency, of around 450 seconds in vacuum conditions, significantly higher than alternatives like hydrazine or kerosene-based fuels. The main challenge for chemical propulsion systems lies in the storage of liquid hydrogen, which must be kept at cryogenic temperatures below negative 253 degrees Celsius. Oxygen is somewhat easier to manage, liquefying at negative 183 degrees Celsius, but still requires sophisticated insulation and cooling systems. Engine components must also handle the extreme temperature shift from cryogenic propellants to combustion temperatures exceeding 3000 degrees Celsius, requiring advanced materials and cooling systems within the engine itself. Nuclear thermal propulsion, NTP, offers a compelling alternative that could make excellent use of hydrogen extracted from comets. Instead of burning hydrogen with oxygen, NTP systems heat hydrogen propellant by passing it through a nuclear reactor core. The heated hydrogen expands and exits through a nozzle, generating thrust without combustion. This approach offers specific impulse values potentially exceeding 900 seconds, double that of the best chemical rockets, while requiring only one propellant instead of two. The single propellant nature of NTP makes it particularly attractive for comet refueling scenarios, as hydrogen alone could be prioritized during extraction operations. The higher efficiency means that less propellant mass is needed for a given mission, potentially allowing smaller, more nimble spacecraft to accomplish ambitious exploration goals. However, the nuclear reactor adds complexity, mass, and regulatory challenges that would need to be addressed before such systems could be deployed for regular use. Solar thermal propulsion represents another option that could utilize hydrogen extracted from comets. This technology uses large mirrors to concentrate sunlight, heating a propellant to high temperatures before expelling it through a nozzle. While less efficient than nuclear thermal approaches, with specific impulse values typically between 500 and 700 seconds. Solar thermal systems avoid the complexity and safety concerns of nuclear reactors. The main limitation is power density. Solar concentration only works well relatively close to the Sun, making this approach less suitable for missions in the outer solar system where many comets spend most of their time. Electric propulsion systems offer some of the highest efficiency possible with current technology and could make use of various elements found in comets. Ion thrusters, which use electric fields to accelerate charged particles to extremely high velocities, can achieve specific impulse values exceeding 3,000 seconds. These systems typically use noble gases like xenon or krypton as propellant, elements present in small quantities within comets. While the amount of these gases in a typical comet is relatively small compared to water ice, they could be collected and concentrated during the extraction process, providing a valuable high-efficiency propellant option. Hall effect thrusters, a variant of electric propulsion, could potentially use other comet-derived propellants. Research has shown that these engines can operate with a wide range of propellants, including water vapor itself. This flexibility could be valuable during early comet mining operations when propellant production systems are still being refined, allowing the spacecraft to utilize whatever resources are most readily available rather than requiring highly purified elements. The main limitation of electric propulsion is its low thrust-to-power ratio. These engines provide excellent efficiency but minimal thrust, meaning they can't lift spacecraft from planetary surfaces and require long operation times to achieve significant velocity changes. They also require substantial electrical power, which might be challenging to generate in the outer solar system where solar panels become less effective. Despite these limitations, their incredible efficiency makes them ideal for long-duration missions where propellant mass is at a premium. Hybrid propulsion architectures that combine multiple engine types might offer the best solution for comet-refueled spacecraft. A vehicle could use high-thrust chemical engines for time-critical maneuvers like landing on or departing from a comet, while employing high-efficiency electric propulsion for long cruise periods between destinations. This approach maximizes the benefits of both technologies while minimizing their respective drawbacks. The spacecraft could potentially carry dedicated tanks for different propellant types, refilling each as appropriate resources are extracted during comet mining operations. Beyond the major propulsion categories already mentioned, several emerging technologies show promise for utilizing comet-derived resources. Magnetoplasmodynamic thrusters, which create thrust by accelerating plasma through magnetic fields, could use water or other compounds as propellant after conversion to plasma state. Pulsed plasma thrusters might utilize solid materials extracted from comet dust as propellant. These technologies remain largely experimental but could eventually offer additional options for comet-refueled spacecraft. The propellant production and engine systems would need to be closely integrated, with real-time monitoring of propellant quality to ensure engine safety. Contaminants in the fuel could damage sensitive engine components, particularly in high-performance systems operating at extreme temperatures or utilizing precise electrical fields. Filtration and purification systems would need to certify propellant quality before transferring fuel to engine feed systems, with sensors detecting any potentially harmful impurities. Engine design would also need to account for the variable composition of comet-derived propellants. Unlike Earth-launched missions where propellant specifications can be precisely controlled, comet mining operations might produce fuels with slightly different properties depending on the specific composition of the target comet. Engines with wider operating parameters would be advantageous, able to maintain safe, efficient operation despite minor variations in propellant makeup. The integration of propulsion systems with the overall spacecraft architecture presents another design challenge. Tanks, feed lines, pumps, and engines must all function together as a cohesive system while accommodating the thermal control requirements mentioned earlier. Propellant tanks might be positioned to serve as radiation shields for sensitive electronics or crew quarters in human missions. feed lines would need to be routed to minimize thermal interactions with other spacecraft systems, particularly where cryogenic propellants flow near heat-generating components. For long-duration missions, engine durability becomes paramount. Components that might be replaced or serviced on Earth-based systems would need to operate reliably for years without maintenance in deep space. This drives material selection toward highly durable alloys and ceramics that can withstand repeated thermal cycling and exposure to reactive propellants. Redundant systems might be incorporated for critical functions, allowing the spacecraft to continue operating even if individual components fail. The promise of comet-derived propellants extends beyond just refueling existing spacecraft designs. As this technology matures, entirely new mission architectures become possible, spacecraft designed from the ground up to utilize in-situ resources rather than carrying all necessary propellant from Earth. These vehicles might be larger and more capable than current designs, with propulsion systems optimized specifically for the types and quantities of propellants available from comets. This represents a fundamental shift in spacecraft design philosophy, moving from the current paradigm where every gram of launch mass is precious to a future where propellant becomes an abundant resource harvested throughout the solar system. While human oversight would be ideal for these complex extraction and propulsion operations, the reality of early comet mining missions is that most work will need to be performed autonomously by robotic systems. The extreme distances involved in deep space missions create communication delays that make real-time control from Earth impractical, necessitating sophisticated robots capable of operating independently in one of the most challenging environments imaginable. Autonomous robots designed for comet operations must overcome numerous challenges unique to this environment. The extremely low gravity, typically less than 1/10,000th of Earth's, means that traditional locomotion methods don't work well. A walking robot might accidentally launch itself into space with a single step, while wheeled vehicles might struggle to maintain traction on the loose, powdery surface. This unusual environment has prompted engineers to develop specialized mobility systems unlike anything used on Earth. Legged robots with extremely gentle foot placement and anchoring capabilities show promise for comet surface operations. These systems would move deliberately, securing themselves to the surface before shifting position, similar to how rock climbers maintain 3 points of contact when ascending a cliff face. Each leg would contain sensors to test surface firmness before applying weight, preventing the robot from breaking through thin crusts or becoming stuck in soft material. Tethered systems offer another approach to comet mobility. A central anchored platform could deploy smaller robots connected by cables, allowing them to move across the surface while remaining secured against accidental launches into space. The tethers would provide power and data connections while serving as safety lines, and could be retracted to retrieve robots if they encounter difficulties. This approach minimizes risk while still allowing exploration of a substantial area around the anchor point. For covering larger distances, hopping robots might prove most efficient. These would make controlled, calculated jumps across the surface, using the comet's low gravity as an advantage rather than a hindrance. Precise thrusters or mechanical springs would launch the robot in a carefully plotted trajectory, with sensors constantly monitoring position to ensure an accurate landing at the destination. While airborne, the robot could conduct observations of the surrounding terrain, identifying promising resource deposits or hazards to avoid. The most advanced comet mining operations might employ all these mobility types in a coordinated system, with different robots specialized for particular tasks. Hopping robots could conduct broad reconnaissance, identifying promising resource deposits. Tethered systems might then perform detailed analysis of these areas, with legged robots ultimately deploying the heavy extraction equipment once ideal mining locations are confirmed. Beyond mobility, comet robots require extraordinary perception capabilities to understand their environment. The stark lighting conditions on a comet create extreme contrasts between blindingly bright sunlit areas and pitch-black shadows, challenging conventional computer vision systems. LiDAR, light detection and ranging sensors, can create detailed three-dimensional maps regardless of lighting conditions by actively projecting laser beams and measuring their reflection times. Infrared cameras might detect temperature variations that indicate different material compositions or structural features beneath the surface. Machine learning algorithms would process this sensor data to identify the most resource-rich areas for harvesting. These systems would be trained on Earth using simulated comet surfaces and sample materials, then refine their understanding through real-world experience on the comet. Over time, the robots would develop increasingly accurate models of which surface features correlate with valuable subsurface deposits, optimizing the extraction process without human intervention. The harsh space environment necessitates extraordinary reliability in these robotic systems. Radiation can damage electronic components, extreme temperature variations stress mechanical parts, and abrasive dust can wear down moving surfaces. Designing for these conditions requires redundant systems for critical functions, radiation-hardened electronics, and special attention to material selection. Moving parts are particularly vulnerable in the vacuum of space, where traditional lubricants might evaporate or freeze, leading to increased wear or seizure of mechanisms. Self-repair capabilities would be invaluable for robots operating millions of kilometers from Earth. This might include carrying spare parts that can be automatically installed by the robot itself, or having multiple robots that can perform repairs on each other. Some research even explores self-healing materials that can automatically restore structural integrity after minor damage, potentially extending the operational life of comet robots substantially. The coordination between multiple robots presents another layer of complexity. Efficient resource extraction likely requires several specialized machines working together, some drilling or heating the comet's surface, others collecting the released material, and still others processing it into usable propellant. These robots must communicate with each other despite potential radio interference from the spacecraft, coordination delays, and the irregular terrain of the comet that might block direct communication paths. Swarm robotics approaches show particular promise for these operations, rather than relying on a few large, complex robots. A swarm system uses many smaller, simpler units that coordinate their activities. This architecture offers inherent redundancy. If a few units fail, the overall mission continues with minimal impact. The swarm can also reconfigure itself to adapt to changing conditions or unexpected discoveries, assigning more units to promising areas or pulling back from hazardous regions. The control software governing these robotic systems represents some of the most advanced artificial intelligence applications in space exploration. The robots must balance multiple competing priorities, maximizing resource extraction while preserving their own safety, maintaining appropriate communication links while exploring new areas, and distributing work efficiently among multiple units with different capabilities. They must also adapt to unexpected conditions, from equipment malfunctions to surprising comet compositions or structural features not anticipated in their original programming. These autonomous systems would still maintain communication with Earth when possible, sending data about their operations and discoveries while receiving occasional software updates or mission priority changes. However, the communications delay, potentially hours long for distant comets, means that the robots must handle day-to-day operations independently, only consulting with human operators for major strategic decisions or when encountering completely novel situations beyond their programming. The development of these autonomous robots proceeds incrementally, with each generation building on lessons learned from previous missions. Early comet robots might be limited to surface reconnaissance and small sample collection, with minimal processing capabilities. As technology advances and our understanding of comet environments improves, later generations would take on more complex extraction and processing tasks, eventually enabling full-scale propellant production without human presence. This progressive approach allows engineering teams to solve problems incrementally rather than attempting to create perfect, fully autonomous systems from the start. Each mission provides valuable data about how robots perform in the actual comet environment, information that cannot be perfectly simulated on Earth. These lessons directly inform the design of subsequent robots, gradually building toward the sophisticated autonomous mining operations needed for large-scale comet refueling infrastructure. The autonomous robotic systems required for comet mining operations face another critical challenge. They need reliable power sources to function in the extreme environment of deep space. Power systems for comet refueling infrastructure must overcome unique obstacles while providing consistent electricity for extraction, processing, and propulsion systems that might operate for months or years far from Earth. Solar power, the mainstay of most current space missions, becomes increasingly problematic as spacecraft venture farther from the Sun. The solar energy available at Earth's distance from the Sun, 1 astronomical unit, is approximately 1,360 watts per square meter. By the time you reach Jupiter at 5 astronomical units, this drops to just 54 watts per square meter, less than 5% of Earth values. For comets with highly elliptical orbits that take them even farther out, solar power becomes even less practical during the outer portions of their trajectories. Despite these limitations, solar arrays remain attractive for comet missions operating in the inner solar system due to their reliability and lack of consumable resources. Modern high-efficiency photovoltaic cells can convert over 30% of received sunlight into electricity, and lightweight deployable structures can support massive arrays that compensate for the reduced solar intensity at greater distances. For comets that spend significant time in the inner solar system between Mars and Jupiter, solar power might remain viable throughout the mission with sufficient array sizing. The irregular shape and rotation of comets create additional complications for solar power systems. Unlike Earth-orbiting satellites that can maintain optimal sun pointing for their arrays, a spacecraft anchored to a rotating comet experiences varying illumination throughout the comet's day. Power management systems must handle these fluctuations, storing excess energy during peak illumination to sustain operations during shadowed periods. This typically involves battery systems with high cycle life capable of repeated charge-discharge cycles without degradation. Lithium-ion batteries similar to those used in electric vehicles provide good energy density but may struggle with the extreme cold of deep space. Advanced thermal management systems would be needed to keep batteries within their operational temperature range, potentially using waste heat from other spacecraft systems. Alternative battery chemistries like lithium-sulfur or solid-state designs currently under development promise better cold temperature performance and higher energy density, potentially making them ideal for future comet missions. For missions targeting comets with orbits that take them beyond Jupiter, alternative power sources become necessary. Radioisotope thermoelectric generators, RTGs, have powered numerous deep space missions including Voyager, Cassini, and New Horizons. These devices convert heat from the natural decay of radioactive material, typically plutonium-238, into electricity using thermocouples. A modern RTG, like the Multi-Mission Radioisotope Thermoelectric Generator, MMRTG, used on the Mars Curiosity rover, produces about 110 watts of electrical power at the beginning of its life, with output gradually declining over decades as the radioactive fuel decays. While RTGs provide reliable power regardless of distance from the Sun, their relatively low output limits the scale of operations they can support. A small reconnaissance mission might function well with RTG power, but large-scale resource extraction would likely require multiple units, increasing cost and complexity. The limited global supply of plutonium-238 also constrains the number of RTG-powered missions that can be launched in the near future, though efforts to restart production have made progress in recent years. For truly large-scale comet mining operations, nuclear fission reactors represent the most promising high-power option. Space-rated fission reactors could generate kilowatts to megawatts of electrical power, orders of magnitude more than RTGs, enabling energy-intensive processes like electrolysis of water into hydrogen and oxygen. NASA's Kilo-Power project has demonstrated small fission reactor technology that could potentially scale up for comet refueling applications, providing reliable power regardless of distance from the sun or local lighting conditions. The main challenges for nuclear power in space involve safety, mass, and heat rejection. Launch safety protocols require extensive testing and redundant containment systems to ensure the reactor remains inactive until safely deployed in space. The reactor's radiation also necessitates shielding to protect sensitive electronics and, on crewed missions, human operators. Heat rejection presents perhaps the greatest engineering challenge in the vacuum of space. Waste heat from the reactor can only be dissipated through radiation, requiring large radiator panels that increase the spacecraft's overall size and complexity. Regardless of the primary power source chosen, comet refueling operations would likely benefit from a hybrid approach that combines multiple technologies. A spacecraft might use solar arrays when operating in the inner solar system, switching to nuclear power sources when the comet's orbit takes it to darker regions. This flexibility would ensure consistent power availability throughout the mission while maximizing the use of free solar energy when available. The possibility of using resources extracted from the comet itself for power generation offers an intriguing avenue for extending mission duration. Fuel cells that combine hydrogen and oxygen to produce electricity and water could operate using propellants manufactured on-site. During peak power demands, these fuel cells could supplement the primary power system, with their water byproduct being recycled back into the resource extraction process. Similarly, any methane or carbon monoxide extracted from the comet could potentially fuel small combustion generators for supplementary power. Energy storage technologies beyond batteries might also play important roles in comet refueling power systems. Flywheels store energy as rotation in a high-speed mass, offering high cycle life and good performance in extreme temperatures. Supercapacitors provide rapid charge and discharge capabilities ideal for handling power spikes, though their relatively low energy density limits their use for long-term storage. Both technologies could complement battery systems in managing the variable power environment of a comet mission. The physical distribution of power throughout a comet mining facility requires careful consideration. High-voltage transmission minimizes power loss over distances but introduces insulation challenges in the vacuum environment. Wireless power transmission using resonant inductive coupling might allow mobile robots to operate without direct electrical connections, simplifying their design and enhancing mobility. For widely distributed operations covering significant portions of the comet's surface, a miniature power grid might be established with multiple generation points feeding into a common distribution network. Power system reliability becomes absolutely critical given the remote nature of comet operations. Redundant systems, fault detection, and self-healing capabilities would be incorporated throughout the power architecture. The overall system would likely be designed to degrade gracefully rather than fail catastrophically if part of the power generation capacity is lost. Non-essential systems would be systematically powered down to preserve core functions until repairs can be made or additional power sources activated. As with all aspects of comet refueling infrastructure, power systems would likely evolve through multiple generations of increasing sophistication. Initial demonstration missions might rely on proven technologies like solar arrays and batteries despite their limitations. As confidence in the overall concept grows, more advanced nuclear systems could be deployed, enabling larger-scale operations that transform comets from scientific curiosities into practical refueling stations supporting humanity's expansion throughout the solar system. Even with reliable power systems in place, comet refueling missions face another fundamental challenge: maintaining communication across the vast distances of space. Unlike missions to the Moon or even Mars, where round-trip communication delays range from seconds to minutes, Spacecraft operating on distant comets might experience delays of hours between sending a message and receiving a response from Earth. This reality fundamentally changes how missions must be operated, placing greater emphasis on spacecraft autonomy while still maintaining essential data links to mission control. The physics of deep space communication imposes unavoidable constraints on data transmission. Radio signals travelling at the speed of light take approximately 8 minutes to reach Earth from the Sun, with proportionally longer times for more distant objects. A spacecraft operating on a comet near Jupiter would experience a round-trip communication delay of at least 1 hour and 20 minutes, while one at Neptune's distance would face a delay of over 8 hours. These delays mean that real-time control from Earth becomes impossible by the time ground controllers see a problem and send instructions. Conditions at the spacecraft may have changed dramatically. Signal strength presents another major challenge. As radio transmissions follow the inverse square law, doubling the distance reduces signal strength to 1/4 of its original value. A spacecraft at Jupiter must generate a signal 65 times more powerful to achieve the same received signal strength as an identical spacecraft at Mars. This drives the need for larger antennas, more powerful transmitters, or some combination of both, all of which add mass and complexity to the mission. High-gain antennas serve as the primary solution for long-distance communication. These dishes focus radio energy in a specific direction, significantly increasing the effective power of transmissions. However, they must be precisely pointed at Earth to function effectively, typically requiring alignment accurate to within fractions of a degree. For a spacecraft attached to a rotating comet, this means the antenna must constantly move to maintain Earth pointing, introducing potential mechanical failure points into this mission-critical system. The irregular movement of comets creates additional tracking challenges, unlike planets that follow relatively predictable circular orbits. Comets trace eccentric elliptical paths that can be perturbed by gravitational interactions with planets or outgassing events that create small but unpredictable changes in trajectory. Earth-based deep space communication networks must continuously refine their understanding of the spacecraft's exact position to maintain contact, a process that becomes more difficult with increasing distance. The environment around an active comet further complicates communication. As comets approach the Sun, they release dust and gas that form the characteristic coma and tail. This material can scatter and absorb radio signals, potentially degrading communication quality or even temporarily blocking contact when the spacecraft passes through particularly dense regions of the coma. Communication systems must be designed with sufficient margin to maintain essential links despite these periodic interruptions. Data rate limitations pose significant constraints on mission operations. While Earth-orbiting satellites can achieve transmission speeds measured in gigabits per second, deep space missions typically operate at much lower rates. NASA's Deep Space Network might support data rates of just kilobits per second for distant missions, limiting the amount of information that can be transmitted. This constraint forces mission planners to carefully prioritize data, potentially using onboard processing to analyze raw information and transmit only the most significant findings. Several technologies are being developed to address these communication challenges. Optical communication using lasers instead of radio waves offers potentially much higher data rates and smaller, lighter hardware. NASA's Psyche mission, launched in 2023, carries the Deep Space Optical Communications DSOC experiment to test this technology beyond lunar distances. Laser communication could eventually enable video streaming and other high-bandwidth applications from deep space missions, though it requires even more precise pointing than radio systems and can be blocked by dust or clouds. Relay networks represent another promising approach for maintaining contact with comet missions. Rather than communicating directly with Earth, spacecraft might transmit to nearby relay satellites in less challenging orbital positions, which then forward the data to Earth using more powerful communication systems. A network of such relays distributed throughout the solar system could provide more consistent contact with deep space missions, though establishing such infrastructure would require significant investment. For human missions to comets, a distant but conceivable future scenario, communication becomes even more critical. Crews would need more robust data links for psychological well-being, medical support, and technical assistance. Delayed video conferencing might be possible, where each party records messages for the other to view hours later. But the lack of real-time conversation would create unique challenges for mission operations and crew psychology. The fundamental limitations of deep space communication directly impact how comet refueling missions would be designed and operated. Systems must be capable of functioning autonomously for extended periods without human intervention. Critical decision-making algorithms would need to be implemented on board the spacecraft rather than relying on ground controllers. Extensive failure detection and recovery capabilities would be essential, allowing the spacecraft to recognize and address problems before they become critical and without waiting for Earth-based analysis. Communication protocols for deep space missions emphasize reliability over speed. Transmission errors are addressed through forward error correction techniques that add redundancy to signals, allowing the receiver to detect and correct certain types of errors without requesting retransmission, which would introduce additional multi-hour delays. Critical commands might be transmitted multiple times or acknowledged through specific verification sequences to ensure they are properly received and executed. Data compression becomes essential for maximizing the limited bandwidth available. Raw instrument data and imagery would be processed on board to reduce size before transmission, potentially using artificial intelligence to identify the most scientifically valuable information. For example, rather than sending thousands of routine images of an unchanging comet surface, onboard systems might identify and transmit only those showing significant changes or unusual features. Local communication networks would connect multiple elements of a comet refueling operation: extraction robots, processing facilities, and the main spacecraft would exchange information using short-range, high-bandwidth links unaffected by the delays inherent in Earth communication. These local networks might use radio frequency communication for reliability or optical systems for higher data rates, with protocols specifically designed to function in the unique environment around a comet. Security considerations also factor into communication system design. As commercial interest in space resources grows, protecting proprietary technology and resource location data becomes increasingly important. Encryption and authentication protocols prevent unauthorized access to command systems or interception of sensitive data. These security measures must function with minimal processing overhead, as computing resources on spacecraft are limited compared to terrestrial systems. The communication architecture for comet refueling missions would likely evolve alongside other mission elements. Early technology demonstrations might rely heavily on Earth-based control despite the inherent delays, accepting operational inefficiencies while building confidence in core extraction technologies. As these systems mature, increasing autonomy would reduce dependence on frequent Earth communication, with ground controllers shifting towards strategic oversight rather than day-to-day operational management. The ultimate vision is a network of largely self-sufficient refueling stations throughout the solar system, checking in with Earth periodically but independently, conducting the complex operations necessary to transform comet resources into spacecraft fuel. The communication challenges inherent in deep space operations highlight the critical importance of safety protocols when handling the volatile materials found on comets. These celestial bodies contain compounds that, while valuable as potential fuel sources, can be hazardous during extraction and processing operations. Developing comprehensive safety procedures is essential not just for protecting equipment investments, but potentially for ensuring mission success in the isolation of deep space. There are no emergency response teams to call if something goes wrong. Comets contain numerous potentially dangerous materials, starting with the simple but problematic issue of dust. Comet dust particles are typically tiny, often just micrometers in diameter, but can cause significant damage to mechanical systems and pose respiratory hazards in pressurized human habitats if not properly contained. These particles move at high velocities when released during outgassing events, essentially becoming micrometeoroids that can penetrate protective coverings or damage sensitive optical equipment. Any extraction system must incorporate robust dust containment measures, potentially including electrostatic precipitators that give dust particles an electric charge and then collect them on oppositely charged plates. Water, while seemingly benign, creates significant safety challenges when transitioning between states in the vacuum of space. When ice sublimates directly to vapor during heating operations, it can create rapid pressure increases in enclosed spaces. Without proper venting systems, these pressure spikes could rupture pipes, damage collection equipment, or even cause catastrophic containment failures. Pressure relief valves, burst discs, and actively controlled venting systems would be essential components of any water processing equipment, with redundant sensors continuously monitoring pressure throughout the system. Some comets contain significant quantities of carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, both colorless, odorless gases that can be lethal to humans in sufficient concentrations. While primarily a concern for crewed missions, these gases can also interfere with certain equipment functions and chemical processes. Detection systems using infrared spectroscopy or other techniques would constantly monitor gas compositions during extraction operations, triggering automatic shutdowns if dangerous concentrations are detected. For human missions, environmental control systems would require multiple layers of protection, with backup air supplies and emergency breathing apparatus readily available in case of contamination. Perhaps the most hazardous compounds found in comets are hydrogen cyanide and formaldehyde, both toxic substances that can be present in measurable quantities. Hydrogen cyanide is particularly dangerous, being both highly toxic and flammable. Processing systems would need specialized catalytic converters or scrubbers to neutralize these compounds before they could contaminate other systems. Equipment designed to handle these materials would require extraordinary corrosion resistance and leak prevention measures, with all connections double or triple sealed to prevent escape. Radiation presents another safety concern for comet operations. While comets themselves aren't radioactive, spacecraft operating in deep space are exposed to cosmic radiation without the protection of Earth's magnetic field. This radiation can degrade materials over time, potentially creating failure points in containment systems. Critical safety components would require radiation hardening, and regular automated inspections would check for signs of radiation damage. For crewed missions, radiation shielding would be a major design consideration, potentially using water extracted from the comet itself as a highly effective radiation barrier. The extreme temperature variations experienced during comet operations add another layer of safety complexity. Materials expand and contract with temperature changes, potentially creating leaks at connection points or causing embrittlement and fracture in extreme cold. Safety systems must function across this entire temperature range, using materials specifically selected for their performance in space conditions. Heating systems for critical components would maintain minimum operating temperatures, while cooling systems would prevent overheating during energy-intensive processing operations. Electrical safety takes on new dimensions in the comet environment. The combination of vacuum conditions and fine particulate dust creates potential for static electricity buildup and discharge, essentially creating risk for spark-induced explosions if flammable gases are present. All electrical systems would require proper grounding, though ground is a relative concept in space, with surge protectors and isolation circuits preventing cascade failures. Intrinsically safe designs would be employed for components operating near volatile materials, limiting electrical energy to levels incapable of triggering combustion even under failure conditions. Fire presents a uniquely dangerous scenario in space, where traditional firefighting methods may not work and evacuation options are limited or non-existent. Fire suppression systems for comet processing equipment would likely use inert gases like nitrogen or helium, which can smother flames without leaving residues that might contaminate processed materials. Segmented design would allow fires to be isolated within specific modules, preventing spread to other systems. Temperature monitoring would detect hotspots before they reach ignition temperature, allowing preventative measures to be implemented. The autonomous nature of comet operations necessitates automated safety systems capable of independent decision-making. These systems would operate on separate computers from the main control systems, providing independent verification of safe operating conditions. If dangerous parameters are detected, these safety computers have override authority to shut down operations regardless of commands from the primary system. This independence is crucial for preventing common mode failures where a single software or hardware issue compromises both operational and safety systems. Redundancy represents a core principle of safety design for comet refueling operations. Critical containment systems would feature multiple layers, ensuring that failure of a single component doesn't lead to catastrophic release of hazardous materials. Similarly, detection systems would employ different sensing technologies for the same parameters, perhaps using both pressure transducers and mechanical pressure switches to prevent sensor failures from blinding the system to developing dangers. Emergency response protocols would be programmed into the system from the start, with predetermined reactions to various failure scenarios. These might include automatic venting of pressure buildup, controlled disposal of contaminated materials, reconfiguration of processing pathways to bypass damaged components, or in extreme cases, jettisoning of compromised modules to protect the remainder of the operation. The system would be designed to fail safe, returning to the most secure configuration possible given the circumstances. For future human missions to comet refueling stations, additional safety considerations come into play. Airlocks would incorporate decontamination capabilities to prevent comet materials from entering habitable areas. Spacesuits for external operations would be designed to resist corrosion from comet compounds while providing enhanced protection against punctures from sharp ice fragments. Medical facilities would stock specific countermeasures for potential exposures to toxic comet materials, with treatment protocols developed based on detailed analysis of comet composition. Perhaps the most fundamental safety protocol involves thorough pre-mission analysis of the target comet, understanding its specific composition, structure, and behavior allows for tailored safety measures addressing its particular hazards. Remote sensing would map dangerous features like pressurized pockets or unstable regions before landings are attempted. Preliminary robotic missions might extract and analyze samples, identifying any unexpected compounds that might require specialized containment or handling procedures. Despite all these hazards, it's worth noting that many of the safety challenges associated with comet materials are well understood from terrestrial industrial processes. The petroleum, chemical, and nuclear industries have developed sophisticated protocols for handling volatile, toxic, and corrosive substances under challenging conditions. Space applications require adaptation of these principles rather than entirely new development, providing a foundation of proven safety concepts that can be modified for the unique environment of comet operations. The selection of which comets to target for refueling operations is itself a critical safety decision that dramatically impacts mission complexity and risk profile. Not all comets are created equal when it comes to their potential as cosmic gas stations, and multiple factors must be considered when identifying optimal candidates for early resource utilization. Orbital characteristics represent perhaps the most important consideration in comet selection. The ideal target would follow a predictable path that brings it relatively close to regions of space where refueling capabilities are most needed. Comets with orbits that cross near the Earth-Mars transfer corridor, for instance, might support early human exploration of the red planet. Similarly, comets that pass through the asteroid belt could service mining operations targeting valuable metals in asteroids. The orbital period, how long the comet takes to complete one trip around the Sun, also matters greatly. Shorter period comets, those completing an orbit in less than 20 years, provide more frequent access opportunities than long-period comets that might take centuries to return to the inner solar system. The stability and predictability of a comet's orbit factors heavily into its selection as a refueling target. Some comets experience significant orbital perturbations from planetary gravitational influences or non-gravitational forces caused by their own outgassing. These changes make long-term mission planning difficult and increase the fuel required for rendezvous maneuvers. Comets with well-established orbital histories spanning multiple observed passages are preferred, as their future positions can be predicted with greater confidence. Inclination, how tilted a comet's orbit is relative to the plane of the solar system, significantly impacts the energy required to reach it from Earth. Comets with low inclination, orbits that roughly align with the planets, require less propellant to reach than those in highly inclined or even retrograde, backward relative to planetary motion, orbits. Since early refueling missions will likely be capability demonstrations with limited propellant budgets, these lower energy targets present more feasible initial options. The physical composition of candidate comets is another crucial selection factor. Spectroscopic observations from Earth can provide preliminary data about a comet's chemical makeup, indicating which volatile compounds are most abundant. Comets with high water ice content would be preferred for operations focused on producing hydrogen and oxygen propellants, while those showing stronger signatures of carbon compounds might be better targets if methane or carbon monoxide fuels are desired. The dust-to-ice ratio also matters. Comets with lower dust content generally allow for easier extraction of volatiles with less filtration required. Activity level varies dramatically between comets and directly impacts operations planning. Highly active comets that produce substantial outgassing when approaching the Sun create hazardous conditions for spacecraft, with unpredictable jets of material potentially damaging equipment or destabilizing landing craft. However, completely inactive comets might have their volatiles locked away under thick insulating layers, requiring more energy to access. Moderately active comets often represent the best compromise, showing evidence of accessible volatile compounds without the extreme hazards of highly active objects. The physical structure of a comet directly affects the feasibility of landing and resource extraction. Radar observations and close-up imaging from previous missions have revealed that comets range from relatively solid, coherent objects to loose rubble piles with the consistency of freshly fallen snow. The European Space Agency's Rosetta mission found that Comet 67P/Churyumov-Gerasimenko had surface material in some regions with a compressive strength similar to fresh snow, while other areas were as hard as solid ice. Comets with at least some regions of moderate strength would be preferred for early missions, providing stable platforms for extraction equipment. Rotation rate represents another important selection criterion. Comets typically rotate once every few hours to several days, with some exhibiting complex tumbling motions rather than simple rotation around a fixed axis. Slower, more predictable rotation simplifies operations, allowing longer continuous work periods at specific sites without requiring equipment to constantly reposition. Extremely rapid rotators might create unacceptable centrifugal forces that complicate anchoring, while irregular tumblers make systematic surface operations nearly impossible. The size of candidate comets directly relates to their resource potential and operational lifespan. Larger nuclei contain more extractable material and can support more extensive or longer duration mining operations. The nucleus of Comet Hale-Bopp, for instance, measures approximately 60 kilometers across and contains enough volatile material to produce millions of tons of propellant. By contrast, Comet 103P/Hartley 2 has a nucleus just over 1 kilometer in size, limiting its potential yield despite having a favorable composition. Balancing size against accessibility often leads to medium-sized comets, a few kilometers in diameter, being preferred for initial operations. Surface features visible in telescope or spacecraft imagery provide clues about resource accessibility. Smooth plains might indicate recently deposited materials with minimal processing required. while heavily cratered or rough terrains suggest older surfaces where volatiles might be depleted. Active regions showing jets or vents demonstrate where volatiles definitely exist near the surface, potentially making them prime extraction targets. High-resolution mapping would identify flat areas suitable for landing operations and stable equipment deployment. Temperature profiles across a comet's surface and interior influence extraction strategies and energy requirements. Comets that approach closer to the Sun naturally warm up, potentially making some volatile compounds more accessible with less energy input. However, this same heating can drive off the most valuable light elements if they're not captured during this active phase. Understanding the thermal history and current temperature regime of a candidate comet helps predict which compounds remain and how easily they can be accessed. Previous scientific study represents a practical consideration in target selection. Comets that have been visited by previous missions provide enormously valuable ground truth data about conditions likely to be encountered. Comet 67P/Churyumov-Gerasimenko, studied extensively by the Rosetta mission, offers detailed information about surface properties, composition, and structural characteristics that would reduce risk for a follow-up resource utilization mission. While limiting operations to previously visited comets would be unnecessarily restrictive, those with extensive observational data provide advantages for early demonstration missions where reducing uncertainty is paramount. Proximity to other valuable destinations in space might make certain comets more attractive despite less favorable physical characteristics. A comet that passes near multiple asteroids of scientific or commercial interest could serve as a hub for broader exploration activities, providing propellant for spacecraft to visit these additional targets. Similarly, comets with orbits that periodically bring them relatively close to outer planets might facilitate exploration of these distant worlds by providing refueling opportunities that extend mission ranges. The optimal comets for early refueling demonstrations likely combine moderate size, predictable orbits, known composition with high water content, reasonable activity levels, and adequate structural strength to support landed operations. As refueling technology matures, operations could expand to more challenging targets with potentially higher resource yields or strategic orbital positions. The catalogue of potential targets continues to grow as astronomical surveys discover and characterize additional comets, expanding the options for future resource utilization throughout the solar system. Once suitable comets have been identified and the mining operations established, the next major technological challenge emerges: how to store and transfer the cryogenic fuels produced from these icy bodies. This aspect of comet refueling represents one of the most demanding engineering problems in the entire operation, requiring solutions that work reliably in the extreme environment of deep space over potentially years-long timeframes. The fuels likely to be produced from comet materials include some of the most difficult substances to store in existence: liquid hydrogen, which offers the highest energy per weight of any chemical fuel, must be maintained at temperatures below -253 degrees Celsius to remain liquid. This extreme cold is just 20 degrees above absolute zero, presenting extraordinary insulation challenges. Liquid oxygen, while somewhat more manageable at -183 degrees Celsius, still requires sophisticated cryogenic systems far beyond conventional fuel storage technology. Storage tanks for these cryogenic propellants would utilize multiple approaches to maintain these extreme temperatures. Multi-layer insulation, MLI, serves as the first line of defense against heat intrusion. These blankets consist of multiple layers of highly reflective material, typically aluminized mylar, separated by low-conductivity spacer materials. Each layer reflects thermal radiation, with 20 to 30 layers being common in spacecraft applications. The performance of MLI depends on vacuum between the layers, making it particularly suitable for space applications where vacuum naturally exists outside the spacecraft. Beyond passive insulation, active cooling systems would maintain cryogenic temperatures during long-term storage. Cryocoolers, essentially specialized refrigerators designed for extreme cold, would remove heat that inevitably leaks through the insulation. These devices typically use the Stirling cycle or pulse tube designs to achieve cryogenic temperatures with minimal moving parts, enhancing reliability for long-duration missions. The power requirements for these cooling systems represent a significant consideration in overall mission design, potentially driving the need for larger solar arrays or nuclear power sources. Tank design involves careful consideration of materials that perform well at cryogenic temperatures without becoming brittle or developing leaks. Titanium alloys offer excellent strength-to-weight ratios and good performance across a wide temperature range, making them leading candidates for cryogenic tank construction. Carbon fiber composites with specialized resin systems also show promise, potentially offering weight savings compared to metal tanks, regardless of primary material. Tanks would likely incorporate internal baffles to minimize sloshing during spacecraft maneuvers and may use capillary systems to ensure consistent propellant flow in microgravity. One of the greatest challenges in cryogenic storage is managing boil-off, the inevitable conversion of liquid propellants back to gas as heat slowly penetrates the storage system. For long-duration missions, even small daily boil-off rates become significant over time. A tank losing just 0.1% of its contents daily would lose over 30% in a year. Advanced storage systems aim to reduce this to nearly zero through combination of superinsulation, active cooling, and potentially integrated refrigeration loops that recapture boiled-off gas and reliquefy it. Boil-off management becomes particularly complex in the variable thermal environment around comets. As a comet approaches the Sun, increasing solar radiation makes maintaining cryogenic temperatures more energy-intensive. Conversely, in the outer solar system, natural cold can assist cooling systems but may create challenges for other spacecraft components that need to remain warm. Sophisticated thermal management systems would continuously balance these competing requirements, potentially repositioning the spacecraft to utilize natural shadowing from the comet itself as a thermal shield during closer approaches to the Sun. Transfer systems for moving cryogenic propellants from production facilities to storage tanks and ultimately to client spacecraft represent another engineering challenge. Traditional pump systems struggle with cryogenic liquids due to seal failures and cavitation issues at extremely low temperatures. Alternative approaches include pressure-fed systems that use helium or other inert gases to push propellants through the system without mechanical pumps. Capillary action and surface tension devices can also move liquids in microgravity without pumps, though these generally work best for smaller scale transfers. Standardized docking interfaces would be essential for propellant transfer between the Comet refueling station and client spacecraft. These would likely follow designs similar to NASA's International Docking System standard, but with added connections for propellant transfer lines and control signals. Quick disconnect couplings would allow propellant lines to be connected and disconnected without leakage, incorporating multiple redundant seals and automated verification systems to ensure proper connection before transfer begins. The extreme temperature difference between cryogenic propellants and the receiving spacecraft creates significant challenges during refueling operations. If cold propellant contacts relatively warm transfer lines, it immediately vaporizes, potentially creating pressure spikes that disrupt flow. Pre-cooling procedures would gradually bring transfer systems to appropriate temperatures before beginning main propellant flow, minimizing thermal shock and ensuring smooth operations. This might involve flowing small amounts of propellant through the system and venting it to gradually cool components to operating temperature. Fuel gauging in microgravity presents another technological challenge. Without gravity pulling liquid to the bottom of tanks, conventional level sensors don't work reliably. Alternative approaches include capacitance measurements that detect the dielectric difference between liquid and vapor phases, or pressure-volume temperature (PVT) calculations that infer propellant quantity from overall tank conditions. Accurate gauging is essential both for inventory management at the refueling station and for client spacecraft that need precise knowledge of their propellant quantities for mission planning. Zero-loss transfer systems represent the gold standard for cryogenic propellant handling in space. These designs aim to eliminate venting during transfer operations, ensuring that every kilogram of produced propellant reaches its intended destination. Achieving this requires sophisticated vapor recovery systems that capture boil-off gas created during transfers, recompress it, and recondense it back to liquid. While complex, such systems dramatically improve overall efficiency, particularly important when considering the significant energy investment required to produce propellants from comet materials in the first place. Storage and transfer systems would incorporate extensive instrumentation to monitor conditions throughout the propellant handling chain. Temperature sensors would track thermal gradients across tank walls and through insulation layers. Pressure transducers would detect early signs of excessive boil-off or transfer line blockages. Flow meters would verify proper transfer rates and identify potential leaks. All these sensors would feed into automated control systems capable of adjusting operations in real time to maintain optimal conditions without human intervention. For human missions to refueling stations, additional safety systems would prevent accidental exposure to cryogenic materials. Double-walled lines with vacuum insulation and leak detection would run throughout human-accessible areas. Emergency shut-off systems would isolate propellant sections in case of detected leaks, while personal protective equipment would shield crew members during necessary maintenance activities. Specialized tools designed for cryogenic environments would allow repairs without risk of frostbite or more serious injury from contact with extremely cold surfaces. The technologies developed for storing and transferring cryogenic fuels harvested from comets would have applications far beyond these specific missions. Similar systems could support lunar or Martian bases, deep space habitats, and commercial space operations throughout the solar system. The expertise gained in managing these challenging materials in space would represent a valuable technological foundation for expanding human presence beyond Earth, potentially transitioning from government demonstration projects to commercial operations as the techniques mature and markets develop. As we contemplate establishing mining operations on comets and extracting their resources for our benefit, important questions arise about the environmental impact of these activities. While comets orbit far from Earth in the vacuum of space, ethical considerations regarding their alteration remain relevant both scientifically and culturally. Developing responsible approaches to comet resource utilization requires careful consideration of potential impacts and mitigation strategies. The most direct environmental concern involves the physical alteration of comet structures. Extracting significant quantities of ice and volatile compounds necessarily changes the comet's mass distribution, potentially altering its trajectory over time. While individual extraction operations might remove relatively small percentages of a comet's total mass, cumulative effects from sustained operations or multiple missions could eventually create measurable changes. Careful modelling would be required to predict how these alterations might affect the comet's long-term orbital evolution, particularly for comets that make periodic approaches to Earth or other inhabited areas of the solar system. Beyond mere mass removal, the distribution of that removal matters significantly. Preferentially extracting material from specific regions could alter a comet's center of mass, potentially changing its rotation rate or even causing structural instabilities in extreme cases. Mining operations would need to consider these factors, potentially distributing extraction sites across the comet's surface to minimize imbalances, or selecting naturally symmetric extraction patterns that preserve rotational stability. Regular monitoring of the comet's rotation and overall structure would provide early warning of any concerning changes. Outgassing triggered by mining activities presents another potential impact worth consideration. Comets naturally release gas and dust as they approach the Sun, but mining operations that expose fresh, volatile material or apply heat for extraction purposes could accelerate or alter this natural process. Increased outgassing might create temporary coma or tail features visible to astronomers on Earth, potentially interfering with scientific observations of other celestial objects. More significantly, It could change the non-gravitational forces acting on the comet, further complicating prediction of its future trajectory. The scientific value of comets extends far beyond their potential as fuel sources. These pristine objects preserve material from the early solar system, offering unique insights into the conditions that existed during planet formation over 4 billion years ago. Some scientists argue that certain comets should be preserved in their natural state as scientific reserves, similar to protected wilderness areas on Earth. These designated comets would remain untouched by resource extraction, maintained purely for research purposes to ensure that future generations of scientists can study truly pristine examples of these ancient objects. The possibility that comets might harbour prebiotic compounds or even simple organic structures relevant to the origins of life adds another dimension to environmental considerations. Some theories suggest that comets delivered water and organic compounds to early Earth, potentially playing a role in the emergence of life on our planet. Extensive mining before thorough scientific investigation could potentially destroy evidence relevant to these fundamental questions about life's origins. A balanced approach might require comprehensive scientific sampling and analysis before large-scale resource extraction begins, preserving knowledge even as materials are utilized. Contamination represents a two-way concern in comet operations. Human spacecraft inevitably carry microorganisms and organic compounds from Earth, potentially contaminating the pristine comet environment and complicating future scientific studies. Conversely, materials from comets might contain unknown compounds that could present biological or chemical hazards if inadvertently brought back to Earth or human habitats. Strict planetary protection protocols similar to those used for Mars missions would likely apply to early comet operations, with careful decontamination procedures for both outbound and return missions. The visual appearance of comets has cultural significance across human history, with these objects featured in art, literature, religious texts, and traditional knowledge systems worldwide. Visible alterations to comets, particularly those that can be observed from Earth without specialized equipment, might raise concerns from cultural perspectives. While most mining operations would likely target smaller, less visible comets initially, the potential cultural impact of visibly altering celestial objects deserves consideration in mission planning and public communication efforts. Beyond physical and scientific considerations lie questions about legal frameworks and governance structures for resource utilization beyond Earth. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 establishes that celestial bodies cannot be claimed as territory by any nation, but remains somewhat ambiguous regarding resource extraction. More recent discussions at the international level have begun to address commercial space resource utilization, though primarily focusing on the Moon and asteroids rather than comets specifically. Developing clear, internationally recognized frameworks for responsible comet mining would help prevent potential conflicts and ensure that benefits from these common resources are appropriately shared. A related concern involves equitable access to space resources. If early adopter nations or corporations establish dominant positions in comet resource utilization, they might gain significant advantages in overall space development that could widen existing technological and economic gaps. International cooperation models that allow broader participation in comet mining technologies and benefits could help address these concerns, potentially through joint missions, technology sharing agreements, or resource allocation frameworks that consider the needs of developing spacefaring nations. The concept of sustainability, while different in space than on Earth, remains relevant to comet mining discussions. Unlike terrestrial resources that regenerate through biological or geological processes, comet materials once extracted are permanently removed. However, the sheer number of comets in the solar system, estimated at over 1 trillion in the distant Oort cloud, means that resource scarcity is unlikely to become a practical concern for the foreseeable future. Nevertheless, developing efficient extraction and utilization technologies from the outset would establish valuable precedents for responsible resource use throughout the solar system. Balancing environmental concerns with the practical benefits of comet resource utilization requires thoughtful approaches that might include establishing protected scientific reserve comets that remain untouched, requiring thorough scientific investigation before commercial extraction begins, implementing extraction methods that minimize structural impacts, creating international frameworks for oversight and benefit sharing, and continuously monitoring operations for unexpected consequences. These measures could help ensure that humanity's expansion into the solar system proceeds in a manner that preserves scientific knowledge and respects the unique nature of celestial objects, while still enabling the practical use of space resources. The environmental considerations for comet mining highlight a broader question about humanity's relationship with space. As our technological capabilities grow, we transition from passive observers of celestial objects to active participants capable of modifying them for our purposes. This transition carries responsibilities to act thoughtfully, preserving scientific knowledge, respecting diverse cultural perspectives, and establishing sustainable practices that will serve humanity's long-term expansion beyond Earth. With careful planning and international cooperation, comet resource utilization could become not just a technical achievement but a model for responsible stewardship as we extend our reach throughout the solar system. While responsible stewardship of comets as scientific and cultural resources remains important, the practical implementation of refueling stations must ultimately address a fundamental question: is this economically viable? The establishment of comet-based refueling infrastructure would require substantial investment in research, technology development, spacecraft, and operations. These costs must eventually be justified through tangible economic returns or strategic benefits that outweigh the expenses. The economic analysis begins with understanding the current cost paradigm for space missions. At present, every kilogram of propellant used in deep space must first be launched from Earth at tremendous expense. Launch costs have decreased significantly in recent years, from tens of thousands of dollars per kilogram to the current rate of approximately $2,000 to $5,000 per kilogram to low Earth orbit using the most cost-effective vehicles. However, sending that same kilogram to deep space destinations requires additional propellant for transfer orbits, multiplying the effective cost several times over. The gear ratio problem compounds this expense. To deliver 1 kilogram of useful payload to a distant destination, a spacecraft might need 5 to 10 kilograms of propellant, depending on the specific mission profile. This creates a multiplicative effect where small increases in final payload require disproportionately larger increases in initial launch mass. This fundamental physics constraint severely limits what we can accomplish in deep space using Earth-launched propellant alone. Comet refueling stations offer a potential solution by breaking this paradigm. If spacecraft can refuel at strategic locations throughout the solar system, they need only carry enough propellant for the first leg of their journey, dramatically increasing the effective payload capacity for a given launch mass. A mission designed to refuel at a comet might achieve 5 to 10 times the useful payload delivery of a conventional mission using the same initial launch vehicle. The economic model for early comet refueling operations would likely follow patterns established by previous space infrastructure development. Initial demonstration missions would be government-funded scientific and technical programs focused on proving the core technologies rather than immediate economic return. These Pathfinder missions would reduce technical risk for subsequent commercial operations through practical demonstration of extraction, processing, and storage technologies in the actual space environment. As capabilities mature, public-private partnerships might emerge similar to NASA's Commercial Orbital Transportation Services (COTS) program that helped develop private cargo delivery to the International Space Station. Government space agencies would guarantee a certain volume of propellant purchases to provide baseline revenue, while allowing companies to develop and own the actual refueling infrastructure. This model distributes financial risk while creating incentives for operational efficiency and cost reduction. Fully commercial Comet refueling operations would likely emerge only after the technology is well established and multiple potential customers exist beyond government agencies. This transition might parallel the ongoing commercialization of low Earth orbit, where initial government investment in the Space Shuttle and International Space Station has gradually given way to private companies offering services to multiple customers, including governments, corporations, and even wealthy individuals. The potential customer base for comet-derived propellant would initially center on scientific missions to the outer solar system, probes destined for the ice giants Uranus and Neptune, long-duration comet or Kuiper Belt object rendezvous missions, or ambitious concepts like solar gravitational lens telescopes would all benefit tremendously from refueling capability. These scientific missions alone might not justify the infrastructure investment, but they represent an important initial market segment. As lunar and Mars exploration expands, propellant depots in cislunar space could become significant customers for comet-derived resources. Water extracted from comets could be delivered to these more accessible locations, where it would be processed into propellant for vehicles operating between Earth and the Moon or departing for Mars. This creates a multi-tier transportation network where specialized vehicles focus on efficient operation within their designated regions. Asteroid mining operations represent another potential customer base with significant long-term economic potential. While asteroids contain valuable metals like platinum, gold, and rare earth elements potentially worth trillions of dollars, the cost of returning these materials to Earth using conventional propulsion is prohibitively high. Affordable refueling from comets could fundamentally change this equation, potentially enabling profitable asteroid mining by dramatically reducing the propellant cost component of these missions. Space tourism beyond Earth orbit, while currently speculative, could eventually create additional demand for comet-derived propellant. Companies already selling suborbital and orbital experiences might eventually expand to lunar flybys or landings, which would benefit from lower-cost propellant available in cislunar space. More ambitious concepts like luxury space habitats at Lagrange points would similarly benefit from affordable supply chains enabled by in-space refueling. The time frame for economic viability varies significantly depending on the development pathway and investment levels. Under aggressive funding scenarios with strong government support, initial demonstration missions might launch within 10 to 15 years, with limited commercial operations beginning 5 to 10 years after successful demonstrations. More conservative projections suggest 30 to 50 years before widespread commercial utilization of comet resources becomes routine. A critical factor in the economic equation is the potential for cost reduction through process improvement and scale. Early comet refueling operations would likely produce propellant at costs higher than Earth-launched alternatives, justified by the unique advantages of having propellant available in deep space rather than pure economic competition. As operations mature, increasing automation, improved extraction efficiency, and economies of scale could potentially reduce costs by orders of magnitude, similar to cost reductions observed in other space technologies like solar panels and launch vehicles. Resource rights and ownership frameworks represent a significant economic consideration that remains unresolved. The Outer Space Treaty establishes that nations cannot claim sovereignty over celestial bodies, but recent national legislation in countries like the United States and Luxembourg has begun establishing frameworks for private companies to own resources they extract from space objects. International consensus on these frameworks would reduce investment uncertainty and potentially accelerate commercial development of comet refueling infrastructure. The development pathway will likely involve incremental capability building rather than immediate full-scale implementation. Initial missions might demonstrate simple water extraction on a small scale, perhaps producing just a few hundred kilograms of propellant. Subsequent missions would scale up production volume while adding capabilities for different propellant types or more sophisticated propellant management. This staged approach manages financial risk while gradually building the technology base needed for full commercial operations. Ultimately, The economic viability of comet refueling stations depends not just on the direct cost comparison with Earth-launched alternatives, but on the new capabilities and missions they enable that simply cannot be accomplished under the current paradigm. Just as air travel was initially more expensive than rail, but enabled entirely new transportation patterns and economic activity, comet refueling may prove economically transformative by creating possibilities that cannot be achieved through incremental improvements to conventional space transportation. The economic considerations of comet refueling cannot be evaluated in isolation. These operations would exist as part of a broader space infrastructure network supporting humanity's expansion throughout the solar system, rather than standalone facilities. Comet refueling stations would function as crucial nodes in an interconnected transportation and resource utilization system spanning from Earth orbit to the furthest reaches of our planetary neighborhood. This integrated approach envisions a multi-tier transportation network with specialized vehicles operating in different regions. Large, efficient cargo vessels might travel between Earth orbit and lunar space, never landing on any planetary surface. Specialized landers would connect these in-space transportation nodes with the surfaces of the Moon or Mars. Mining vessels would travel between asteroids or comets and processing facilities located at strategic points. Each vehicle type would be optimized for its specific operating environment rather than designed for the compromises required of spacecraft that must function across multiple regimes. Propellant depots would serve as the connective tissue between these transportation elements, providing refueling capabilities at strategic locations. A depot in low Earth orbit might receive propellant launched from Earth or delivered from lunar production facilities. Depots near the Moon could store propellant produced from lunar ice or delivered from comets. Similar facilities in Mars orbit would support operations on and around the Red Planet. Comet refueling stations would feed this network, providing resources particularly valuable for missions beyond Mars, where Earth-launched propellant becomes prohibitively expensive. Communication and navigation networks would span the entire system, providing the information infrastructure necessary for coordinated operations. Deep space optical communication relays could provide high bandwidth connections between distant facilities. Navigation beacons would offer precise positioning information throughout the solar system, similar to how GPS functions on Earth but extended to interplanetary scales. These systems would allow for efficient coordination between different elements despite the vast distances and communication delays involved. Standardized interfaces would be crucial for enabling this integrated infrastructure, just as shipping containers revolutionized global trade by creating a standard unit for cargo handling across ships, trains, and trucks. Space infrastructure would benefit from standardized docking ports, refueling connections, and cargo containers. These standards would allow spacecraft from different manufacturers or countries to utilize the same infrastructure, maximizing flexibility and redundancy across the network. A key advantage of integrated infrastructure is the potential for in-space manufacturing using resources gathered throughout the solar system. Raw materials might be sourced from multiple locations, metals from asteroids, volatiles from comets, and specialized materials from Earth and brought together at manufacturing facilities in space. These factories could produce new spacecraft components, replacement parts, or even entire vehicles without the need to launch them from Earth's deep gravity well. Power generation and distribution would form another critical infrastructure element interconnected with refueling operations. Solar arrays work well in the inner solar system but become less effective at greater distances from the Sun. Nuclear power systems might provide reliable energy farther out, potentially using fuel materials extracted from planetary bodies. Power beaming technology could eventually allow transmission of energy between infrastructure nodes, reducing the need for each facility to generate all its own power. Life support infrastructure would gradually expand as human presence grows beyond Earth orbit. Initial habitats at lunar bases or in cislunar space would demonstrate closed-loop life support technologies that recycle water, oxygen, and even food production materials. These systems would become increasingly self-sufficient as they incorporate in-situ resources, including water from comets delivered to convenient locations. Eventually, permanent habitats throughout the inner solar system could support human crews maintaining and operating the broader infrastructure network. The phasing of infrastructure development would follow logical progression based on distance from Earth and technological readiness. Near-Earth facilities would be established first, including low Earth orbit propellant depots and initial lunar bases. As these demonstrate successful operation, infrastructure would expand to Mars orbit and surface facilities. Asteroid belt operations would follow, with dedicated processing facilities and transportation systems. Comet refueling stations would develop in parallel, initially targeting comets with orbits that bring them relatively close to these established infrastructure nodes. The growth pattern would likely resemble historical transportation network development on Earth, where initial routes connected major population centers, with secondary and tertiary networks gradually filling in to create comprehensive coverage. In space, primary routes would connect Earth, Moon, and Mars, with additional infrastructure gradually extending to resource-rich asteroids, scientifically interesting moons of the outer planets, and strategically located comets. International cooperation would be essential for developing this integrated infrastructure efficiently. No single nation currently has the resources or technical capability to implement such an extensive system alone. Collaborative frameworks, similar to the International Space Station program, could distribute costs and risks while ensuring broad access to the resulting capabilities. Commercial participation would grow over time as revenue opportunities mature, potentially transitioning from primarily government funding to increasingly commercial operation as seen with communication satellites and launch services. The timescale for establishing this integrated infrastructure extends over decades rather than years. Initial elements like lunar bases and cislunar propellant depots might become operational within the 20s, with Mars infrastructure following in the 2040s if current program timelines hold. Asteroid belt operations and the first dedicated comet refueling stations might emerge in the 2050s or 2060s, though technological breakthroughs or increased funding could accelerate this timeline. The regulatory and governance frameworks for this infrastructure would likely evolve alongside the physical systems. Early agreements might focus on technical standards and basic coordination, similar to how the International Telecommunications Union manages satellite frequency allocations. As infrastructure becomes more extensive and integrated, more comprehensive governance structures might emerge, potentially resembling international bodies that oversee air traffic control or maritime navigation while respecting the prohibition on territorial claims established in the Outer Space Treaty. Resilience would be a fundamental design principle throughout this infrastructure network. Unlike terrestrial systems that can often be repaired quickly when problems occur, space infrastructure must function reliably over long periods with minimal direct human intervention. This drives designs toward redundancy, modularity, and ability to operate in degraded modes. The integrated nature of the system would itself provide resilience, with multiple pathways for accomplishing critical functions rather than single-point failure risks. The development of this integrated space infrastructure represents not just a technical challenge but a long-term civilizational project comparable to the construction of global telecommunications networks or transportation systems. Each element, including comet refueling stations, contributes to a greater whole that ultimately enables humanity to access and utilize the vast resources of our solar system far more efficiently than could be achieved through individual, unconnected missions launched directly from Earth. The integrated space infrastructure network spanning our solar system wouldn't just serve practical transportation and resource needs, it would also create unprecedented opportunities for scientific discovery, particularly in the field of astrobiology. Comets have long fascinated scientists not just as potential fuel sources but as time capsules that might contain clues about life's origins or even the building blocks for supporting future space-based biological systems. Comets preserve some of the most pristine material from the early solar system, including complex organic compounds that formed over 4.5 billion years ago. These carbon-based molecules include amino acids, the fundamental building blocks of proteins essential to all life on Earth. Several missions have already detected these compounds on comets, including the European Space Agency's Rosetta mission to Comet 67P/Churyumov-Gerasimenko, which identified glycine, the simplest amino acid, along with phosphorus and numerous organic molecules necessary for building DNA. The discovery of these prebiotic compounds supports the theory that comets may have delivered some of the essential ingredients for life to early Earth through impacts during our planet's formative period. By studying pristine comet material up close, rather than after it has been altered by atmospheric entry and terrestrial contamination, scientists could gain crucial insights into the inventory of organic compounds available during Earth's early history and how they might have combined to form more complex biological structures. Resource extraction operations on comets would need protocols for identifying and preserving biologically significant materials encountered during mining. This might include setting aside representative samples of different comet regions before processing begins, maintaining them in pristine condition for scientific analysis. The infrastructure supporting refueling operations could include dedicated laboratory facilities equipped to conduct sophisticated chemical and biological analysis without requiring samples to be returned to Earth. These laboratories might employ automated systems capable of detecting amino acids, nucleobases, sugars, and other biologically relevant compounds with greater sensitivity than current spacecraft instruments allow. Advanced spectroscopic techniques could determine the exact molecular structure and chirality, left or right-handedness, of organic molecules, providing insights into their formation processes and potential compatibility with Earth-based life. Machine learning systems could identify unusual or unexpected compounds worthy of more detailed investigation, potentially discovering molecular structures unlike anything previously documented. The potential for discovering novel biological precursors on comets extends beyond just understanding life's origins. Unique organic compounds formed through processes unavailable on Earth might have practical applications in medicine, materials science, or biotechnology. Just as extremophile bacteria from Earth's harshest environments have yielded valuable enzymes for industrial processes and scientific research, compounds from the extreme environment of comets might provide similarly unexpected benefits. This creates a compelling case for careful scientific assessment of comet materials alongside resource utilization efforts. The intersection of resource extraction and scientific investigation creates both challenges and opportunities. On one hand, mining operations could potentially destroy valuable scientific evidence before it can be properly studied. On the other hand, the infrastructure and capabilities developed for resource extraction would enable far more extensive scientific investigation than would be possible through dedicated science missions alone. Drilling equipment designed to access subsurface ice for propellant production could simultaneously collect cores for scientific analysis, reaching depths impossible for conventional robotic explorers. The possibility of contaminating comets with terrestrial microorganisms presents both scientific and ethical concerns. Any Earth organisms that survive on a comet could potentially confuse future scientific investigations by creating a false positive for extraterrestrial life. More concerning would be the possibility of disrupting any indigenous microbial ecosystems that might exist within comets, though current evidence suggests this is unlikely. Conversely, preventing unknown comet compounds from contaminating Earth or human habitats would be equally important, requiring careful quarantine and analysis protocols for all materials brought into habitable spaces. While most astrobiologists consider the existence of current life within comets unlikely given the extreme conditions and limited energy availability, the possibility cannot be completely ruled out. Theoretical models suggest that liquid water could exist in subsurface pockets within some comets due to radioactive heating or other processes. These environments, while challenging, are not necessarily beyond the survival capacity of extremophile organisms. Early mining operations would need to include protocols for recognizing and preserving any evidence of past or present biological activity, however unlikely its discovery might seem. Beyond studying comets themselves, the biological research facilities established alongside refueling infrastructure could investigate how terrestrial organisms respond to the unique environment of deep space. Long-duration spaceflight beyond Earth's protective magnetosphere exposes organisms to radiation levels and microgravity conditions that cannot be perfectly simulated on Earth. Understanding how various organisms, from microbes to plants to potentially humans, function in these conditions is essential for developing sustainable life support systems for extended human presence throughout the solar system. Agricultural experiments using water and nutrients extracted from comets could demonstrate the feasibility of space-based food production using in situ resources, while initial systems would likely use growing mediums and seeds brought from Earth. They could gradually incorporate locally sourced water, nitrogen, carbon, and other elements essential for plant growth. These experiments would build on current International Space Station research, but at a scale more representative of what would be needed for self-sustaining habitats. The biological research potential of comet facilities creates an interesting synergy with their resource utilization function. The same water that could be processed into rocket propellant might also support hydroponic plant growth systems. Carbon dioxide extracted from comets could feed into plant habitats. Nitrogen compounds could be processed into fertilizers. This integration of resource streams for both industrial and biological purposes maximizes the value derived from each kilogram of material extracted from the comet. The long-term vision for biological research at comet facilities extends beyond studying terrestrial organisms in space or searching for prebiotic compounds. As our understanding of synthetic biology advances, these facilities might eventually serve as laboratories for designing organisms specifically adapted to function in space environments or process comet materials more efficiently. Such research would be conducted with appropriate containment protocols to prevent unintended release, but could eventually lead to engineered organisms that facilitate resource utilization throughout the solar system. The biological discoveries and capabilities developed through comet research would directly support the establishment of long-duration missions throughout our solar system. The ability to utilize water and organic compounds from comets extends beyond just propellant production to enabling human life support systems to function reliably over missions lasting years or even decades, timeframes currently impossible with closed-loop systems alone due to inevitable resource losses. A network of comet-based refueling and resupply stations positioned throughout the solar system would fundamentally transform our approach to deep space exploration by enabling mission durations previously unimaginable. Current deep space missions operate under severe constraints once they depart Earth's vicinity. They must function with only the propellant, consumables, and spare parts they carry on board. This limitation forces designers to accept painful compromises between mission duration, payload capacity, and reliability. A network of Comet service stations would break this paradigm, allowing spacecraft to travel between distant points by hopping from one refueling opportunity to another. This approach mirrors historical exploration patterns on Earth, where expeditions relied on establishing supply caches or identifying natural resources along their routes. The Lewis and Clark expedition across North America, for example, depended on establishing winter quarters and trading with indigenous peoples for supplies rather than carrying everything from their starting point. Similarly, polar explorers often established supply depots along their intended routes. Space exploration would benefit from this same fundamental approach, with comets serving as the strategic resource depots enabling long-distance journeys. The practical implementation would involve identifying comets with orbital characteristics that create a useful network of refueling opportunities. Ideal candidates would include short-period comets with predictable orbits that bring them to convenient locations relative to major destinations of interest. For example, A mission to Jupiter's moons might plan refueling stops at comets whose orbits intersect the spacecraft's trajectory, both outbound and inbound, effectively doubling the mission's delta-V capacity compared to a conventional direct approach. Mission planning would incorporate detailed knowledge of comet positions throughout the projected timeline, optimizing trajectories to coincide with these movable refueling opportunities. Unlike static infrastructure like a lunar base, comet refueling stations would themselves be in constant motion, requiring sophisticated four-dimensional route planning that accounts for the positions of multiple objects over time. Advanced mission planning software would calculate optimal departure times and trajectories, potentially identifying non-intuitive routes that take advantage of multiple refueling opportunities. The navigation requirements for such missions would be considerably more complex than conventional deep space operations. Spacecraft would need precise knowledge of both their own position and the location of target comets, with continuous updates as both move through space. Optical navigation systems would track the target comet from increasing distances, gradually refining approach trajectories as more data becomes available. The irregular shapes and potentially active surfaces of comets make final approach particularly challenging, requiring sophisticated autonomous systems capable of adjusting to unexpected conditions without real-time input from Earth due to communication delays. Beyond just refueling, comet stations would provide opportunities for maintenance and repairs during long missions. Equipment wears out over time, and the harsh environment of space accelerates degradation of many components. A spacecraft designed for a 10-year mission through the outer solar system might include components with expected lifespans of just 5 to 7 years, planning for replacement during refueling stops along the route. This approach dramatically increases mission reliability by eliminating the need for every component to function flawlessly for the entire mission duration. The maintenance capabilities at comet stations would likely begin with robotic systems capable of swapping standardized components or modules. Spacecraft would be designed with accessibility in mind, featuring external components that can be replaced without requiring pressurized human access. As infrastructure develops, more sophisticated repair capabilities might include 3D printing of replacement parts using materials extracted from the comet itself, further reducing dependency on Earth-supplied components. For crewed missions, comet resources would extend beyond propellant to include life support consumables. Water extracted from comets could replenish supplies for drinking, hygiene, and radiation shielding. Carbon dioxide and nitrogen compounds could be processed to support plant growth systems that provide both food and atmospheric regeneration. While initial human missions would likely carry emergency reserves of these critical resources, the ability to replenish at comet waypoints would significantly reduce the mass that must be launched from Earth. The psychological benefits of having reliable resupply points cannot be overstated for long-duration human missions. Current mission concepts for human exploration beyond the Moon typically involve scenarios where the crew has no possibility of emergency return or resupply for extended periods. This creates both technical and psychological challenges, as crews must confront the reality that equipment failures or medical emergencies might prove fatal with no possibility of external assistance. A network of comet stations would provide critical psychological waypoints, places where resupply, repairs, or even emergency medical return options become available, breaking a years-long mission into more manageable segments. The emergency response capabilities provided by a comet network significantly enhance mission safety and flexibility. If a critical system fails during deep space transit, the spacecraft could divert to the nearest comet station for repairs rather than attempting to complete the entire mission with degraded capabilities. While such diversions would require additional propellant, the very nature of the network ensures that refueling opportunities would be available to support these contingency operations. This creates a more robust exploration architecture, less vulnerable to single-point failures. Communication infrastructure would likely develop alongside the physical comet network. Relay stations positioned at strategic comets could provide enhanced data transmission capabilities, allowing scientific instruments to return larger data volumes than would be possible through direct-to-Earth communications alone. These relays would be particularly valuable for missions operating in the outer solar system, where distance limits effective communication bandwidth and solar power availability constrains transmitter capability. As the network matures, standardized facilities might emerge at frequently visited comets. These could include permanent extraction equipment, propellant storage depots, navigation beacons, and docking structures, essentially creating interplanetary service stations. Spacecraft designed to utilize this infrastructure would include compatible interfaces, allowing them to take full advantage of available services while minimizing time spent at each waypoint. The ultimate expression of this concept would be dedicated transport vessels operating permanently between established comet stations, never returning to Earth. These ships would cycle continuously through the network, carrying cargo and eventually perhaps passengers between major destinations throughout the solar system. By remaining in space and refueling at comets, they eliminate the enormous propellant requirements associated with repeatedly escaping and entering planetary gravity wells, dramatically increasing efficiency for regular transport between established space destinations. This transition from individual missions launched directly from Earth to an interconnected transport network supported by in-situ resources represents perhaps the most significant paradigm shift in how humanity approaches space exploration. Rather than treating each journey as a unique expedition with all requirements satisfied from the starting point, we would gradually establish a permanent infrastructure enabling routine travel throughout the solar system, with comets serving as the essential refueling depots making this transportation network possible. The development of a permanent transportation network utilizing comets as waypoints would require equipment capable of functioning reliably in one of the most extreme environments imaginable: the harsh conditions of comet surfaces, combining extreme cold, vacuum, abrasive dust, and unpredictable outgassing push conventional materials beyond their limits, necessitating advanced materials specifically engineered for these unique challenges. These specialized materials will form the foundation for everything from drilling equipment to habitat structures, enabling the sustained presence necessary for long-term resource utilization. Temperature extremes represent perhaps the most significant challenge for materials used in comet mining operations. Surface temperatures can range from negative 200 degrees Celsius in shadowed regions to potentially above 0 Celsius in sunlit areas during close approaches to the Sun. This extreme range causes conventional materials to become brittle, crack under thermal stress, or experience significant dimensional changes that compromise precision components. Addressing these challenges requires materials with exceptional thermal stability and resistance to thermal cycling fatigue. Superalloys originally developed for jet engine turbines provide one promising avenue for comet mining equipment. These nickel or cobalt-based alloys maintain their mechanical properties across an extremely wide temperature range and resist creep, slow, deformation under stress, even when hot. Modifications to these alloys for space applications typically include adjusting their composition to minimize outgassing in vacuum and enhance resistance to radiation damage. Their excellent strength-to-weight ratio makes them particularly valuable for components that must remain both lightweight and durable, such as drill bits that experience high mechanical stress during operation. Advanced ceramic composites offer another class of materials well suited to the comet environment. Silicon carbide and boron nitride ceramics maintain exceptional hardness and wear resistance even at cryogenic temperatures, making them ideal for cutting surfaces and bearings. When reinforced with carbon nanotubes or ceramic fibers, these materials gain substantial toughness without sacrificing their temperature resistance. Unlike metals, many ceramics are naturally resistant to the corrosive compounds found in comets, including various acids that might form when certain comet chemicals interact with trace water. For structural components that must maintain precise dimensions across temperature swings, carbon fiber reinforced composites with specially formulated resin systems offer significant advantages. By carefully selecting fiber orientation and resin chemistry, engineers can create composite structures with near-zero thermal expansion, ensuring that critical alignments remain stable regardless of local temperature conditions. These composites can also be engineered to provide electromagnetic shielding, protecting sensitive electronics from solar and cosmic radiation that can cause bit flips or component degradation over time. The challenge of moving parts in space has driven development of self-lubricating materials that function without conventional liquid lubricants, which would evaporate in vacuum or freeze solid at comet temperatures. Polymer composites incorporating solid lubricants like graphite or molybdenum disulfide can maintain low friction across thousands of operation cycles without requiring additional lubrication. More advanced solutions include diamond-like carbon coatings that provide exceptionally low friction coefficients while also protecting underlying materials from wear and corrosion. Surface coatings play a crucial role in extending equipment life in the harsh comet environment. Atomic layer deposition techniques allow for the creation of precisely controlled coatings just nanometers thick that can completely change a material's surface properties while adding negligible mass. Coatings might include reflective layers to manage thermal loads, catalytic surfaces that prevent buildup of problematic compounds, or ultra-hard materials like titanium nitride that resist abrasion from comet dust particles moving at high relative velocities during extraction operations. Self-healing materials represent one of the most promising frontiers for comet mining equipment. These innovative materials contain embedded microcapsules filled with repair agents that automatically release when damage occurs, flowing into cracks and solidifying to restore structural integrity. More advanced versions utilize vascular networks similar to blood vessels, allowing repair agents to reach damaged areas anywhere within the structure. For operations far from human repair capabilities, this self-healing functionality could extend equipment lifespans from months to years, dramatically improving mission economics. Metamaterials, engineered structures with properties not found in naturally occurring materials, offer unique solutions to specific challenges in the comet environment. Acoustic metamaterials could isolate sensitive instruments from the vibrations of drilling operations. Mechanical metamaterials might provide extraordinary shock absorption capabilities despite low mass, protecting equipment during landing operations or unexpected comet activity. These highly engineered structures are typically created through advanced manufacturing techniques like 3D printing, allowing for geometric complexity impossible with conventional fabrication methods. Radiation-hardened electronics represent another critical materials challenge for comet operations. Conventional semiconductor materials degrade under the constant bombardment of cosmic rays and solar radiation, leading to increased error rates and eventually complete failure. Alternative semiconductor materials like silicon carbide and gallium nitride offer greater radiation resistance while also functioning across wider temperature ranges than traditional silicon. For the most critical systems, designers might employ radiation-hardened by design approaches that use specialized circuit architectures and redundancy to maintain functionality even as individual components degrade. Thermal management materials are essential given the extreme temperature environment and limited options for heat transfer in space. Traditional cooling methods relying on convection don't work in vacuum, forcing reliance on conduction and radiation for all heat transfer. Materials with extremely high thermal conductivity, such as pyrolytic graphite or boron nitride, can efficiently move heat from critical components to radiative surfaces. For maintaining warmth in shadowed conditions, aerogels provide exceptional insulation despite their incredibly low density, with some advanced formulations offering up to 100 times the insulating value of conventional materials per unit mass. Biomimetic materials inspired by nature's solutions to extreme environments show particular promise for comet applications. Materials modelled after the antifreeze proteins found in Arctic fish could prevent ice formation in critical components. Lotus leaf-inspired superhydrophobic surfaces might repel condensation in gas collection systems. The structural hierarchy of abalone shells has inspired impact-resistant composites that could protect against micrometeoroid impacts or debris from active comets. For habitable structures that might eventually support human operations at comet facilities, transparent materials capable of withstanding both pressure differential and temperature extremes become necessary. Traditional glass would be too brittle and vulnerable to the micrometeoroid environment, leading to development of laminated polycarbonate composites reinforced with transparent ceramic layers. These multifunctional materials can maintain optical clarity while providing structural integrity, radiation shielding, and micrometeoroid protection. The manufacturing location for these advanced materials presents interesting trade-offs. Initially, all components would be fabricated on Earth, tested in simulated space environments, and launched to their destinations. As in-space manufacturing capabilities develop, producing replacement parts or even entire new systems directly at comet facilities becomes possible. This would utilize materials extracted from the comets themselves, potentially including metals from the dust component or carbon-based materials from the organic compounds. Local manufacturing eliminates the enormous cost of launching mass from Earth while enabling rapid replacement of damaged components. The development timeline for these materials typically involves years of laboratory testing, followed by small-scale demonstrations in low Earth orbit before deployment to deep space missions. Materials that perform well in simulated environments often encounter unexpected challenges in the actual space environment, requiring iterative improvement based on mission experience. This drives a conservative approach where critical components often use well-proven materials despite their limitations, with newer materials initially deployed in redundant or non-critical applications until their reliability is demonstrated through operational experience. The materials science challenges of comet mining highlight the interdisciplinary nature of space resource utilization. Successful development requires collaboration between metallurgists, ceramic engineers, polymer chemists, nanomaterial specialists, and manufacturing experts, all working within the constraints imposed by the space environment and mission requirements. As with other aspects of space development, progress occurs incrementally, with each mission providing valuable data that informs material selection and design for subsequent generations of equipment. As these advanced materials enable increasingly sophisticated comet mining operations, questions inevitably arise about the legal framework governing these activities. The extraction and utilization of resources from celestial bodies operates in a legal environment that combines decades-old space treaties with emerging national legislation and ongoing international discussions. This evolving legal landscape will significantly influence how, when, and by whom comet resources are developed in the coming decades. The foundation of space law regarding resource utilization rests on the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which has been ratified by 111 countries, including all major spacefaring nations. This treaty establishes several fundamental principles. Space is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty. Activities in space shall be carried out for the benefit of all countries, and states are responsible for national activities in space, whether conducted by governmental or non-governmental entities. Notably, while the treaty prohibits nations from claiming territory on celestial bodies, it does not explicitly address the extraction and use of resources from these bodies. This ambiguity in the Outer Space Treaty has led to varying interpretations regarding resource rights. Some legal scholars argue that prohibiting national appropriation of celestial bodies implicitly prohibits resource extraction, as removing material constitutes a form of appropriation. Others maintain that utilizing resources is distinct from claiming territory, similar to how international law permits fishing in international waters without claiming the ocean itself. This latter interpretation has gained traction among spacefaring nations in recent years, reflected in national legislation specifically authorizing space resource utilization. The United States took a significant step in this direction with the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act of 2015. which explicitly grants U.OS citizens the right to own, transport, and sell resources extracted from celestial bodies. Luxembourg followed with similar legislation in 2017, establishing itself as a European hub for space resource companies by creating a clear legal framework for their operations. The United Arab Emirates, Japan, and several other countries have since developed or are developing similar national laws encouraging commercial space resource utilization. These unilateral national approaches have raised concerns about compliance with the international legal framework. The Moon Treaty of 1979 attempted to establish that celestial bodies and their resources are the common heritage of mankind and called for an international regime to govern the exploitation of these resources. However, this treaty has been ratified by only 18 countries, none of which are major spacefaring nations, limiting its practical impact on space resource development. The current legal landscape thus creates a complex environment for comet mining operations. Companies based in countries with supportive legislation have a clear domestic legal basis for their activities, but questions remain about how these claims would be recognised internationally or resolved in cases of competing claims to the same resource. This uncertainty could potentially inhibit investment in large-scale comet mining infrastructure, as companies seek assurance that their rights will be respected before committing substantial resources. International efforts to address these questions have increased in recent years. The United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, COPUOS, has hosted discussions on space resource activities, while informal working groups like the Hague International Space Resources Governance Working Group have proposed frameworks for resource utilization that respect the Outer Space Treaty while providing practical paths forward. These discussions aim to develop internationally recognized principles that balance encouraging space development with ensuring benefits are shared broadly. A licensing system similar to those used for geostationary satellite slots represents one potential approach to managing comet resource utilization. Under such a system, an international body might grant exclusive rights to extract resources from specific comets for defined periods, subject to compliance with safety, environmental, and reporting requirements. This would provide commercial certainty while maintaining international oversight and preventing conflict between competing operations targeting the same comet. The registration of space objects, already required under the Registration Convention of 1975, provides another existing legal tool that could be adapted for comet mining. Countries could register mining spacecraft and their associated claims, providing transparency and a basis for recognizing priority of operations. This approach leverages existing international space law rather than requiring entirely new frameworks, potentially accelerating implementation. Environmental protection protocols represent another important aspect of the emerging legal framework. While comets exist in the vacuum of space far from Earth's biosphere, concerns about preserving their scientific value and potential astrobiological significance have prompted discussions about planetary protection measures. These might include requirements for preliminary scientific assessment before commercial extraction begins, designation of certain comets as scientific preserves off-limits to resource utilization, or extraction methods designed to preserve the comet's overall structure and scientific accessibility. Dispute resolution mechanisms will be essential as multiple entities begin operating on comets. Without established property rights or territorial jurisdiction, conflicts over resource access or interference between operations would lack clear forums for resolution. International arbitration agreements could fill this gap, providing binding resolution of disputes based on agreed principles rather than territorial law. Commercial contracts might incorporate these arbitration provisions even before formal international agreements are established, creating practical solutions within the existing legal framework. The potential for international tensions over resource rights highlights the need for continued diplomatic engagement alongside technical development. Historical parallels exist in international agreements governing Antarctica, deep seabed mining, and radio frequency allocation, all areas where international cooperation was necessary to establish workable frameworks for activities beyond national territories. The lessons learned from these precedents suggest that successful governance of comet resources will likely require similar sustained diplomatic effort, resulting in multilateral agreements that balance commercial interests with broader international principles. The timeline for developing robust international legal frameworks will likely extend over decades, evolving in response to actual mission developments rather than preceding them. Early demonstration missions may operate under existing national laws and basic outer space treaty principles, with more comprehensive frameworks emerging as commercial operations scale up and potential conflicts become more concrete. This incremental approach allows legal development to be informed by practical experience rather than attempting to anticipate all issues in advance. For companies and space agencies planning comet mining operations, this evolving legal landscape necessitates active engagement with both national and international policy processes. Participation in working groups, industry associations, and diplomatic forums provides opportunities to shape emerging frameworks in ways that enable responsible development while providing necessary commercial certainty. Flexibility in mission planning allows adaptation to evolving legal requirements, potentially including provisions for scientific sharing or benefit allocation that align with emerging international expectations. The development of clear, internationally recognized legal frameworks for comet resource utilization represents the final essential element in transforming these distant, icy bodies from scientific curiosities into practical resources supporting humanity's expansion throughout the solar system. As with the technical challenges, the legal questions will be resolved through incremental progress rather than single comprehensive solutions, gradually establishing the foundation for a space economy that utilizes resources from throughout our solar system for the benefit of humanity both on Earth and in our expanding frontier among the stars.